Chapter 1. After spending a week recuperating from the wild fruit poisoning and trying to adapt to his identity after crossing over, List often felt that it was inconceivable. He, who died while working overtime, was actually reborn as an aristocrat. And an aristocrat from a different world. This different world was somewhat similar to medieval Europe, where castles and knights dominated everything on the earth. However, it was a magical world. There were actually dragons and elves, knights who could cultivate their chi, and there were also mysterious magicians. Even List himself had cultivated the basic chi, and became a trainee knight. Beginner chi. The chi in his body flowed ceaselessly. Following his will, it flowed between his hands. Suddenly, he felt his palms heat up, and a powerful force filled them. That slight tingling swelling made him feel as if he could tear tigers and leopards apart. Knight could rule the boundless earth by relying on this chi, which represented power. Chi cultivation. Those who had mastered beginner chi were trainee knight, and those who had mastered intermediate chi were earth knight. List's father, the hereditary Earl of Coral Island, Lee William Tulip, was an earth knight who had mastered intermediate chi. On his territory, which was equivalent to a prefecture-level city, he had absolute power over life and death. He only needed to swear allegiance to the Sapphire Grand Duke. Unfortunately, as the third son of the Earl, he did not inherit the Tulip family's chi talent. Even though he was already an adult at the age of 16, he was still just a trainee knight. His brother, Levis Tulip, became an Earth Knight at the age of 13. He was now an elite among Earth Knights, and could challenge 3 Earth Knights. His sister, Li Weiwei Tulip, also became an Earth Knight before reaching adulthood. There was also a half-brother, Lytton Tulip, who was 12 years old this year and was said to be about to be promoted to an Earth Knight. List inherited more of his appearance from his mother, the late Countess. He had light golden curly short hair, eyes that were as deep as sapphires, regular facial features, fair skin, and a tall figure. He was born with the air of a noble. However, his aptitude was too weak. Perhaps it was because he looked too much like his mother that the Count once had great expectations for him. The greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. When he grew up, his father was completely disappointed in him and even showed disgust. His elder brother, Levis, was temporarily conferred the title of a lifetime viscount and was destined to inherit the title of a hereditary earl. His sister, Li Weiwei, was also conferred the title of Baron of Falcon Town, which was a rare occurrence. She became a hereditary dame of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire with a fief, instead of a lifetime knight with no fief. As for List, just like his sister, he was conferred the title of Baron of Flower Town, which was the most remote town of Coral Island. Levis, who had a temperament like his mother, was always soft and weak. He was bullied by his brother and sister, and after he grew up, his interaction with the Count became increasingly less, to the point that he would rather live in the Knight Academy than go home. Fortunately, he was a good-for-nothing that no one paid attention to. If I replace him, no one will notice. Moreover, I will have my own fief, hereditary title, and control the power of life and death in the territory. How wonderful! List had already overcome the initial panic and was working hard to integrate into this world. He also had to integrate and live like a native. Because in this world, transmigrators did not have many advantages, magic and chi surpassed science. So much so that after he understood some of the situation, he felt more and more that he had to be low-key. The metal mineral deposits came entirely from dragons, and the flourishing of plants was inseparable from sprites. No dragons, no sprites. To want to farm, to want to have an industrial revolution, it was simply a fantasy. However, dragons and sprites were rare essences in the world. The Grand Duchy of Sapphire had only one dragon, the Sapphire Grand Duke's mount of 300 years ago, the Sapphire Dragon. The entire Sapphire family was established on this dragon. It was said that a dragon could live for as long as 1,000 years. In other words, the Grand Duchy of Sapphire still had 700 years of national luck to enjoy. There were more sprites than dragons, but there was a clear hierarchy. List's father, Lee William Tulip, had a tulip greater sprite, which helped the family plant a large number of tulip. As a result, the family was established, and even the family name was changed to Tulip. Greater sprites could live for 200 years. The Tulip family, barring any accidents, could still enjoy more than 150 years of prosperity. Below greater sprites were lesser sprites, which could live for 100 years. The Tulip family had 12 lesser sprites, which helped the family cultivate a variety of plants. Below lesser sprites were sprite worms, which were a kind of sprite born from plants. They had a lifespan of 10 years and could influence the growth of plants. If there was a chance within 10 years, they could evolve into lesser sprites. As for the sprite worm itself, it was only by chance that one would be born from a plant. The Tulip family had cultivated Coral Island for more than 20 years and had harvested more than 100 sprite worms. Counting those that had died, there were only more than 150 sprite worms. Among them, only 12 had evolved into lesser sprites. Sprites. Unfortunately, my predecessor really disgusted the count. Even Li Weiwei got a lesser sprite, while I only have 4 sprite worms. At List's coming-of-age ceremony, the Earl of Coral Island announced that he was conferred the title of Baron of Flower Town and gifted him 4 sprite worms. That was all. "Master, it's time for dinner. Do you want to eat now?" The butler, Carter, knocked on the door and came in, bowing slightly. "It's time for dinner." "All right, go and invite the 2 teachers over to eat together." List ungracefully stretched his waist. During this period of recuperation, he had been bored to death. After a while, the 2 teachers came together. The blonde and swallowtail teacher was the family teacher, Gort. He was already 45 years old and was a down-and-out lord knight. He was attached to the Tulip family and was mainly responsible for List's education. Of course, his main job was to help List manage the entire Flower Town as an administrative officer of Flower Town. "List, your complexion looks much better. Thank God, I can see you running healthy and lively again," Gort said playfully, very casually. The other teacher, with a serious expression and meticulous movements, was List's knight teacher, Marcus. His strength was already at the Earth Knight rank, but he had not yet obtained an aristocratic title. For several generations, his family had been retainer knight of the Tulip family. Finally, an Earth Knight had appeared in his generation. List smiled slightly. "The 2 teachers have arrived. Mr. Carter, please serve the meal." "As you wish, master." The old butler, Carter, gracefully left the living room and went downstairs to inform the kitchen to deliver the meal. "Teacher Marcus, my body has almost recovered. I hope to continue my night cultivation class starting tomorrow," List said. Marcus's square face was expressionless. "All right." Upon seeing this, List smiled slightly. He knew that the Earth Knight had grievances. He hoped to perform meritorious deeds on the battlefield, earn the title of Chevalier Knight, enter the upper class, and become a member of the aristocracy. However, he was transferred to serve as List's knight teacher and was trapped in the backwater of Flower Town. In the Tulip family, List was famous for being a waste. In other words, following List, the chances of becoming an aristocrat were almost non-existent. Soon, the old butler, along with the serving men and the maids, brought the dishes. There was not much food. The quality of life in Flower Town was very low and the output was not much. List was a son who was not favored by the count. The supplies he brought were not abundant and could not support a luxurious life. List ate very seriously. Transmigration was a technical job. Becoming an aristocrat was already very lucky. In this world, apart from the aristocrats, most civilians were just 2-legged sheep at the mercy of others. Chapter 2. Roasted goat meat, boiled lamprey, a small portion of apple puree and snow pear slices, hopped wheat beer, and white bread made of fine wheat flour. This was List's dinner. Western-style food was not to his liking, but he did not know how to cook and could not cook to his liking. Moreover, in this world, aristocrats were strictly prohibited from entering the kitchen, warehouse, and other places where servants should be. Going there would be a violation of aristocratic etiquette and would be laughed at. Of course, the court was an exception. The court's cooks and servants were all held by the aristocrats of the various lesser lords. List's father, the Earl of Coral Island, served as a groom for the new Sapphire Grand Duke. He was responsible for feeding the Sapphire Grand Duke's beloved mount, a precious horse mixed with dragon bloodline. Until now, the Earl of Coral Island would still enter the palace from time to serve as a groom. He was happy to do this, for fear that other aristocrats would replace him as a groom and hinder his close relationship with the Grand Duke. Similarly, the Sapphire Grand Duke had also served as a valet for the King of the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom, his suzerain state, waiting on him. Basically, commoners were the servants of aristocrats, while lesser aristocrats were the servants of greater aristocrats. Only by becoming the king of a state could one be considered a master. Fortunately, in the Flower Town, I am the only master. I don't have to serve anyone. Levis thought contentedly as he ate the barely passable dinner. The Count was his father and did not like him, so he would not bother him. After dinner, the old butler Carter instructed the maids to clean up the tableware, while the valet served List with the water to rinse his mouth. At the end of the process, Carter left with the servants. I will be outside the door. My lord and the two gentlemen, please instruct me. Sorry to trouble you, Mr. Carter. List showed a gentlemanly smile. In terms of aristocratic etiquette, he was influenced by his predecessor. He did not need to take the initiative to learn it, it would naturally come out. Even when dealing with lowly servants, they had to be polite and respectful. It didn't matter if they were beaten or killed in private or how perverted they were, but on the surface, they had to have the demeanor of nobility. It's my honor to serve you. Carter closed the door. List. Gort took a sip of tea with honey and said, the sprite worms should be put to use as soon as possible, but the fief's financial situation is really terrible. The previous administrative officer was a fool who did nothing but oppress the serfs. He left us with a mess. I know. Teacher, investigate it as soon as possible and see where the sprite worm can be placed. Of course, this is my duty. List turned to look at Marcus. Thorn's Ridge is close to the Flower Town's World of Warcraft. Will it be very difficult to inspect it? As for World of Warcraft's harassment of the farmers, as a lord, I must take this seriously. Marcus replied, the Thorn's Ridge is very large and the World of Warcraft's activities are not fixed. You only have 4 retainer knight. Even if I thoroughly understand the World of Warcraft, there is still no way to defend against it. The patrols are a bunch of scoundrels and hooligans. They would only piss their pants in front of World of Warcraft. The Flower Town was located at the easternmost end of the Coral Island and was surrounded by the Thorn's Ridge. There was a lot of World of Warcraft here. Therefore, very few caravans were willing to trade here. They could only produce and sell their own products. Without the help of the sprites, it would be a problem for the farmers to feed themselves. Furthermore, they would have to pay taxes to the Coral Island's ruler, the Tulip family. Aristocrats, on the other hand, only cared about how much tax they could collect and didn't care about the farmers' lives. The Tulip family was no exception. However, the current List could not remain indifferent. After all, he was a new youth bathed in the glorious banner of communism. Since he had become a lord, then saving the people from the abyss of suffering was something he had to do. Only when the Flower Town was prosperous could he enjoy better life as a lord. For both public and private reasons, he had to develop the Flower Town. There is always a way to deal with it. Teacher Marcus, after tomorrow's night class, accompany me to the Thorn's Ridge. As a lord, I still haven't taken a good look at the Flower Town. List, this is not a good idea. just take a stroll in the small town. You shouldn't go to the Thorns Ridge. Don't forget, you almost died in the Thorns Ridge. Gort immediately stopped him. List shook his head. Last time, I accidentally ate a poisonous fruit. This time, I will pay attention. Marcus said bluntly, tonight, I will notify your 4 retainer night attendants to arrange a patrol route in the Thorns Ridge to ensure your safety. Sorry to trouble you. You should be careful. Gort said helplessly. List didn't say anything more. The 2 teachers didn't know his real plan. His body had yet to fully recover. According to his temperament, he would definitely be willing to go out only after he had completely recuperated. However, when aristocrats went out, they either rode a carriage or rode a horse. Unfortunately, he didn't have a carriage. In his memory, riding a horse was not an easy thing to do because there was no saddle or stirrup. When I have time, I can invent stirrups and saddles. As for horseshoes, they can also be invented. Ordinary horses still need them. After seeing off the 2 teachers, List thought. Master, when do you plan to go to bed? The valet came in and asked. After 10 o'clock. Thomas, add a candle to my study, I want to read. List ordered the valet to leave. Thomas's face showed a touch of disappointment. For several days in a row, he hadn't been able to get a chance to show off his skills. List would always order him around, instead of needing him to serve him. As a valet, he felt that he hadn't won the Baron's favor and was worried about his job. That was indeed the case. List did not like valets. Every time Thomas helped him put on his clothes, List would feel goosebumps all over his body. What an evil aristocratic system. Why can't a male aristocrat have a valet? After Thomas brought in a candle and left, the study room became brighter. List got up and opened the curtains. Through the window of the castle, he could see a few lights in a small town not far away. It was very dim. A small town that didn't even have enough to eat. There was no such thing as nightlife, only endless silence. Is this my territory? Poor and backward, but it completely belongs to me. The area of a town is my independent kingdom. I will make it a paradise. In a trance. A faint smoke appeared in front of List. The smoke twisted and formed abstract characters. The characters looked like countless small snakes intertwining together. This was the common language of the Steel Ridge Kingdom, Serpentines. Its origin was already unknown, as there was no habit of recording history here. As someone who had transmigrated, List had inherited all the memories of his predecessor. He could read the Serpentines. It was the content that had puzzled him for a week. Mission: as the Lord, you need to understand everything about the territory. Please patrol the Flower Town, understand the crisis of the territory, and make preparations for future development. Reward: sublimation of Qi. The content was short and not complicated. But what List didn't understand was why he could see the smoke serpentines. When he searched the memories of his predecessor, the smoke serpentines had appeared since childhood. But at that time, the smoke was very faint and very vague, to the point that he couldn't clearly see what the serpentines were saying. He had always thought that he was hallucinating. It wasn't until after his soul transmigrated that List could clearly see the content of the text. After staring blankly for a moment, he stretched out his hand, wanting to touch the smoke. However, the smoke immediately disappeared, proving that it was an illusion. But now, List didn't think that it was an illusion. Perhaps this was the benefit of being a transmigrator, the embodiment of a certain system? Since he couldn't explain it clearly, he decided to verify it. As long as he patrolled the territory, he would be able to complete the mission. Whether or not he could get the reward was proof. If he couldn't get it, then it was just an illusion. If he got it, then it was a benefit. Chapter 3. Thomas left the study, feeling a sense of loss. When he went downstairs, he stopped at the corner of the stairs. He wanted to take out a cigarette and light it, but he found that the cigarette was hidden under the pillow. The butler, Mr. Carter, strictly forbade the servants from smoking in the castle. "Thomas, what are you hiding here for?" A maid, about 30 years old, wearing a black and white maid's skirt, came up from downstairs, carrying a mop and a bucket. "Nothing. Doesn't master let you serve him?" Thomas patted the wall in annoyance. "Maggie, tell me, why doesn't master like me? Although I have never been a valet before, but I once served as Viscount Roosevelt's first valet. I am competent for this job." "How would I know? I am not a maid of Tulip Castle, I have never seen master before. I just asked you, is there anything I have not done enough? You should ask Mr. Carter or Mrs. Morrison. Moreover, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Master only has 3 valets, Jessie is an assistant, and Tom is clumsy and can't serve master. Perhaps master's character is like this. In this small town, no one is more suitable to be a valet than you." Thomas cheered up a little. "Yes, I heard that master is not valued by the Baron in Tulip Castle. Perhaps he will just be the Flower Town Baron for the rest of his life, living in the poor countryside. Maybe. Maggie, do you regret following master here?" "I don't care. Life in the castle is bad, but it is better than going back to the farm and starving to death. I have already sold myself to master, so there is no need to think about regrets." Thomas was about to speak, when someone interrupted him. "Don't you need to work?" "Thomas, Maggie, watch your behavior, don't whisper outside your bedroom and kitchen." Coming up the stairs, the person was the butler of the simple and crude castle, Carter. He was patrolling the castle with a bunch of keys and a bottle of red wine. "Okay, Mr. Carter, I'll go to work now." Thomas and Maggie left in a hurry to do their own things. If the lesser nobles were the servants of the greater nobles, then the male servants and female servants were the servants of the butlers. The aristocratic system had always been this clear-cut. Although the castle was small, there was a lot of work. Even though there was only one noble, Liszt, to serve, the daily workload could be said to be enormous. For example, hygiene. Every morning and night, the inside and outside of the house had to be cleaned. They also had to wash clothes, boil water, prepare food, and clean the toilet bowl. Most of the work was left to the servants. But this didn't mean that Carter didn't need to work. On the contrary, in addition to managing the servants, Carter was also responsible for welcoming guests, pouring wine, supervising the serving of dishes, receiving and sending letters, keeping the high-end tableware, managing the underground wine cellar, and taking care of the most important guests. Old Carter was already 50 years old this year. In this era where the average age was less than 55, he was already an old man. Dang dang dang. He knocked on the door of the study. "Please come in." Liszt's gentle voice sounded from inside the door. He had a steel voice that was popular in the upper class. In the Iron and Steel Ridge Kingdom and its vassal states, countless nobles were distinguished with a steel voice. Old Carter took a deep breath. In Tulip Castle, he didn't have much contact with Liszt. He was mainly responsible for one of the Count's villas. A while ago, during Liszt's coming-of-age ceremony, the Count assigned him to Liszt as a butler. His position was promoted. Being a butler was the ultimate goal of all servants. But the treatment definitely declined. However, Carter didn't have any complaints. He had sold himself to the Tulip family at the age of 15. It had been 35 years since then. He didn't marry and was alone. He had long regarded himself as a member of the Tulip family. If he could follow the descendant of the Tulip family, Baron Liszt, and spend the last few years of his life, it would undoubtedly be a happy ending. "Master, reading at night hurts your eyes. You have to pay more attention. No matter how many candles there are, they are not as good as the sunlight during the day." Liszt smiled slightly. His eyes moved away from the thick bast paper book on the table and looked at the somewhat old butler. "Mr. Carter, have you checked all the rooms?" Except for the room where the servants still have to work, all the other rooms have been locked. Very good. Then, let's have a drink together. Liszt had already noticed the red wine in Carter's hand. The nobles were addicted to alcohol, so much so that it formed an unwritten custom. The master of the castle would drink a few glasses with the butler before going to bed at night and talk about the castle. Liszt didn't like to drink, but his predecessor liked to drink, so much so that his body had a need for alcohol. However, the alcohol content here was very low. Unless he drank like crazy like beer, it would be difficult not to get drunk. Each of them had a glass of red wine. He lightly touched it. Swaying back and forth, Liszt took a sip. Can the castle's expenses support this year's taxes? I'm afraid that it will be a bit difficult. You didn't bring much alcohol from Tulip Castle, and there isn't much wheat flour left. The flour town is very remote, so no caravans are willing to come. Even if we have gold coins, it will still be very difficult to buy wheat and alcohol. However, the good news is that there are a lot of wild fruits in the Thorns Ridge, so there is no need to worry about having no fruits to eat. Liszt wasn't valued by the Count. When they separated, he naturally didn't get much. According to his memory, when his sister Li Weiwei separated, there were a total of 30 carriages, while he didn't even have a carriage. He only had a few horses and a team of commoners carrying some luggage. The difference in treatment was like heaven and earth. However, this was also good. He didn't have to bear too much kindness, so he didn't have to worry about how to express his closeness to the Earl of Coral Island. It won't do without wheat. Liszt put down the glass and said in an unquestionable tone, the flour town must develop as soon as possible. The trade route must be opened. Bread was the staple food here. If there was no white bread made of wheat, then they could only eat the rough and unpalatable black bread made of rye and oats. Liszt already couldn't eat his favorite hometown food, so he would starve to death if he couldn't eat fine white bread. Opening a trade route is not easy. The Thorns Ridge is too dangerous. You can rest assured that I will take care of it. The flour town's future will not be limited by poverty, and the castle won't be so simple that it doesn't even have a name. Liszt said solemnly. Only a magnificent castle could have a name. Calling a simple and crude castle like Liszt's was already praiseworthy. If it had a name, then it would be laughed at by the other aristocrats. Has the sprite worm been taken care of? It is very stable, master. That's good. The glass of wine was finished. Old Carter took his leave tactfully. Master, rest early. Good night. Good night to you as well, Mr. Carter. After Carter left, Liszt looked at the thick bast book describing the customs and practices of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire for a while. The book was very thick, about the thickness of a dictionary. However, the content was actually very little. The thick bast book lived up to its name. Its thickness was almost as thick as pig skin. How was paper invented? Liszt recalled. He found that he had a pretty good memory. He could clearly remember the paper-making process that he had seen on the internet. When there is time, paper will also have to be invented. The Industrial Revolution seems unlikely, but there are still many ways to get rich. In a trance, he became lost in thought again. Sure enough, smoke serpentines once again appeared before his eyes. Chapter 4. Early the next morning. Marcus arrived at the castle early in the morning. Instead of entering, he waited outside the castle. Looking at the low, dilapidated castle, his heart was cold. Perhaps he was thinking that his future was just as dilapidated as the castle. The castle was built on a slope in the southwest corner of the town. There were no tall city walls, no towering archer towers, no battlements, no wide moats, and no huge sluice gates. It was just a slightly larger two-story mansion. There were already faint cracks in the stone walls. Gradually, several tiles fell off the roof. It was unknown whether or not the roof would leak on rainy days. Reportedly, this simple and crude castle had 100 years of history. Before the Coral Island was the territory of the Sir Count, there had been aristocratic life here. Later, it fell into ruin. After the Count was granted the Coral Island, he renovated the small castle and used it as a courtyard for patrolling the flower town. However, he had never lived there. Until now, Baron List lived in the small castle. As for him, an Earth Knight of the former Coral Island Orders of Chivalry, who was ambitious to render meritorious service on the battlefield, would become a frequent visitor to the small castle. Together with Baron List, he guarded the flower town, which had no gravel roads. "Mr. Marcus, good morning." Tom, a serving man carrying an empty bucket and preparing to fetch water from the town's well, greeted him respectfully. Marcus responded indifferently, "Good morning." He could not remember Tom's name, but he remembered his surname. It seemed to be Pigsty, a very typical commoner surname. Even he himself did not have an aristocratic and elegant surname. His surname was Wheel, because his grandfather was a coachman who rolled wheels every day. This was how commoners were, they had the same surname. He envied aristocratic surnames, envied Count surnames. Tulip, what a noble surname. How much effort would it take for him to change to a similar surname? All noble surnames could not be used by commoners. Flowers, gems, metals, aristocrats absolutely would not allow commoners to despise them. After a while, 4 tall men in leather armor arrived behind Marcus. "Teacher Marcus." The 4 of them greeted him. "Carl, Rome, Gray, Odin, you're here." Marcus responded one by one. These 4 were List's retainer knight. A retainer knight was not a knight, but a retainer of a knight. It was a kind of servant responsible for taking care of the knight on the battlefield. Carry the gun, lead the horse, wash the clothes, cook the meal. In essence, Marcus was also a kind of retainer knight. It was just that he was a free person, while retainer knight was a servant who sold himself. After a while, List, who was still not fully awake, walked out of the castle's slightly leaky gate. Early in the morning, List had changed into a simple training uniform. It was a simple yet elegant white color, matched with his enviable face, tall figure, and outstanding temperament. His appearance was absolutely top-notch. "Good morning, Teacher Marcus, Karl Hammerstein, Rome Winebarrel, Gray Sickle, Odin Insole, and ladies and gentlemen." Gentlemen were manservants and ladies were maids. Regardless of whether they were married or not, aristocrats could address their servants as such. It was just like how butlers, regardless of whether they were married or not, would address butlers as Mr. and housekeepers, regardless of whether they were married or not, would address butlers as Madam. List's body had been accustomed to the rigid aristocratic system for 16 years, so he would instinctively greet him like this. "Sir Baron, we will begin the night training class." "Very well." On the mound in front of the castle, List began his night training. His 4 retainer knight did not learn Qi and only trained their bodies on the side. Qi was about bloodline inheritance, and very few commoners could learn it. In fact, List felt that Qi was related to nutrition. Commoners who could not even eat their fill would not be able to refine the strength in their body and turn it into Qi. Among the aristocrats, as long as they worked hard, there was no one who could not cultivate Qi. This was also the reason why the aristocrats firmly controlled their ruling position. With money, they could eat their fill, cultivate Qi, grasp power, and squeeze the commoners. Thus, with more money, more food, stronger Qi, and greater power, they could squeeze the commoners even more. The morning milk and bread provided a steady stream of nutrients for List. Under Marcus's guidance, he constantly practiced the basic Qi. Since he was 6 years old, he had been practicing this secret book. Unfortunately, the results were minimal. Although Qi made him stronger than commoners, compared to an Earth Knight, a trainee knight was very weak. Marcus could defeat him with one hand. A mysterious aura, an experience I have never experienced before. Training. I wonder what will be the reward for the advancement of Qi after completing the mission. Could it be that I will become an Earth Knight? Feeling the Qi in his body, List diligently practiced. After an entire hour, the morning class finally ended. Teacher Marcus, drink some water and rest for 10 minutes, then we will set off. List wiped the sweat on his forehead. The morning class was very tiring. The old butler Carter had already brought a servant to bring nutritious milk tea. Each of the 4 retainer knight had a cup of milk tea with minced meat, milk, and eggs. They held the milk tea in their hands and took small sips, forgetting about the hard work of an hour. Marcus and List had an extra dessert, cheese biscuits. After they finished eating and changed their clothes, the valet Thomas had already brought over List's horse. It was a maroon-colored horse with almost no mixed hair. This was a gift from the Earl of Coral Island when List was 12 years old. At that time, it was still a foal, but now, it had already grown into a majestic horse. Snort. The maroon-colored horse snorted and then intimately rubbed against List's arm. Fire Dragon, my old friend, you must be bored inside the castle. Comforting his horse, List nimbly turned around and mounted it. Behind him, Marcus and the 4 retainer knight rode their own horses. Marcus rode a yellow-gray horse, which was also majestic. It was his own mount. The retainer knight's horses were all ordinary yellow-maned horses, which were List's property. They were only allocated to the retainer knight to feed. Master, I hope you have a safe journey. Carter gave his blessing. Thanks for your auspicious words. List raised his whip. Fire Dragon let out a long neigh and started galloping. Let's go. Riding at the front, List was wearing a World of Warcraft leather armor that only nobles could afford. It was light and breathable, and its defense was better than ordinary armor. He was wearing a black World of Warcraft leather armor, a one-handed sword on his waist, and a black World of Warcraft leather helmet with pheasant feathers on top. He looked especially majestic. His retainer knight, in addition to his own one-handed sword and one-handed shield, had to carry a large knight spear for List, as well as a long sword, hammer, flail, and other backup weapons, as well as lunch and drinking water. Marcus, in addition to his favorite short spear, also had a bow and arrows. He was a sharpshooter. Compared to his identity as an Earth Knight, his identity as a sharpshooter showed more of his value. This was also his lofty ambition to stand out among the Earth Knights of the Coral Islands orders of chivalry, hoping to earn the title of Lord Knight. Dada. Chapter 5. The Flower Town was located in the northeast corner of the Coral Island, and its area was not small. However, List was at a loss as to how big it was. As a remote town of the Coral Island, it was simply delineated northeast of the Thorns Ridge. Its specific area was not marked. In other words, as long as it did not collide with the town southwest of the Thorns Ridge, List could delineate how big the Flower Town was. Even if he included the entire Thorns Ridge, no one could blame him. After all, the Thorns Ridge's subordinates were also not divided on the Coral Island. After more than 20 years of reclamation by the Tulip family, less than 2/3 of the Coral Island had actually been truly developed into farmland and settled down. The remaining 1/3 was barren land. The Thorns Ridge was such a barren land. The Lord's Knight needed to go on expeditions, and the barren land needed to be reclaimed by serfs and commoners. The Thorns Ridge was extremely barren and uneven, and its development value was not high. Moreover, in the face of World of Warcraft, ordinary people were just delicious food. Even hunters did not dare to rashly probe the depths of World of Warcraft. Of course, there were still some adventurers who would go hunt World of Warcraft. Every piece of flesh, every inch of fur, and every piece of flesh could be exchanged for gold coins. Riding on Fiery Dragon, List was full of enthusiasm for the inspection. Horse racing was every aristocrat's innate instinct. How big the Flower Town was depended on where his horse's hooves could reach. At this time, the horse's hooves were trotting on the town street. The street was very dirty, with livestock and human excrement everywhere. Only aristocrats would build toilets. Sanitation has to be changed. Liszt turned around and said to Marcus. Marcus could not deny it. He was not an administrative official, so he was not interested in these things. What he was passionate about was the authority of aristocrats, especially the serfs and commoners on both sides of the street, who continuously saluted Liszt. These people had emaciated faces, which were filled with envy and fear towards aristocrats. His body would shiver. The serfs knelt, the freedmen bowed. Serfs occupied the majority. They had already sold themselves to the nobles and were Liszt's personal property. Marriages and funerals were decided by Liszt. Even if Liszt wanted to exercise his right of the first night, these serfs had to obediently comply, wash their daughters and wives, and send them to the castle. There were very few free people. Most of them were craftsmen like hunters or tailors. The town was small and run down. There weren't many households. Even though all the residents had come to the two sides of the street to pay their respects, there was still no warm atmosphere. As far as the eye could see, Liszt felt that there were probably only a few hundred people in the town. It was not even as many as the students in a school. Low mud and thatched houses stretched across a large area. Most of the town's area was supported by these dilapidated houses. Even two-story houses were rare, and there were only 2 or 3 households. This time, he truly felt the poverty of a commoner's life. His heart was filled with emotions. He was even more glad that he was an aristocrat. He could live in the castle and eat white bread made of fine wheat flour. Fiery Dragon quickly carried Liszt to the end of the town's only street, which ran from north to south. With a slightly heavy heart, he followed the safe route planned by Marcus towards the Thorns Ridge. Along the way, surrounding the outskirts of the town were fields after fields of crops, most of which Liszt couldn't name. These crops were not pleasant, they were all sickly, and there were many weeds growing along with the crops. Clearly, there was no scientific management. Although this era had incredible creatures like dragons and sprites, as well as incredible divine powers like chi and magic, but its development was relatively backward. Although it was impossible to carry out an industrial revolution, but it was still very promising to introduce some scientific development methods. Liszt was very confident in his governance of the fief and the development of the flower town. Not long after, the town was already out of sight. They left the flat land and entered a hilly area with sparse woods. This was the edge of the Thorns Ridge. Sir Baron, World of Warcraft often appears on the edge of the Thorns Ridge. I hope that you will just follow me and not advance rashly. Once they arrived, Marcus began to lead the way and instructed the 4 retainer knight, protect Sir Baron. Unless you become a corpse, do not let World of Warcraft take a step forward. Yes. Karl and the others responded loudly. They were commoners. Here, commoners did not need to go to the battlefield. Only aristocrats and knight went to war. However, although the retainer knight was a commoner, yet they still needed to go to the battlefield. As logisticians, in order to obtain better treatment, they had the responsibility to die for aristocrats. In order to avoid World of Warcraft, the group of knight could only take a detour around the edge of the Thorns Ridge. The woods were still lush. Occasionally, wild animals such as rabbits, foxes, and the like could be seen. There was not much food on the edge of the Thorns Ridge. Therefore, large beasts were rarely seen. In the spring, summer, and autumn, the food in the Thorns Ridge can satisfy the needs of World of Warcraft. Therefore, Flower Town does not often encounter World of Warcraft. However, in the winter, hungry World of Warcraft would often invade Flower Town. Every year, several unlucky fellows would end up as food for World of Warcraft. No matter how bad Marcus's mood was, he was still meticulous. Information about the Thorns Ridge came out one by one. World of Warcraft, I wonder if I can encounter one today. List had searched the memories of his predecessor and had seen several World of Warcraft. Compared to ordinary beasts, the biggest difference between World of Warcraft and ordinary beasts was that they had magic power and could release some powerful spells. Tulip Castle had also raised a small World of Warcraft, Fire Rabbit. Fire rabbits that could release small fireballs tasted delicious and had bright fur. Aristocrats liked to eat fire rabbit meat, while noblewomen liked leather clothes made of fire rabbit fur. He had also seen the fur of a powerful magic beast, the barbarian bear. The Count of Coral Island's most beloved chair was covered in the fur of a barbarian bear. The sinister bear's head was tanned and exuded an intimidating savage aura. Reportedly, in order to hunt giant bear fur, Coral Island's orders of chivalry lost 8 Earth Knights. 8 Earth Knights were enough to seriously injure orders of chivalry. Even a territorial battle might not necessarily result in so many Earth Knights dying. What's more, there were even more trainee knight deaths. Along the way, List constantly recorded the topography of the Thorns Ridge, including which places were suitable for building fortifications, irrigation works, fortresses, and farmland. This was the duty of a feudal lord with land to his name. "It's lunchtime, Odin. Prepare lunch here." "Yes, master." Odin Insole immediately dismounted. He found a flat area, laid a carpet on it, and then placed the rations on it. A simple lunch of bread, caviar, fruit salad, and milk tea was prepared. There was also goat jerky for List. Chapter 6. As an Earth Knight, Marcus's chi was very sensitive to magic and chi. Since he said there was World of Warcraft, then it must be true. List immediately became nervous. The 4 retainer knight hurriedly tidied up the tableware. They were ordinary people who hadn't even trained their chi. Fighting against World of Warcraft was basically courting death. Marcus had already mounted his horse. Don't be in a hurry to tidy up the tableware. Protect Lord Baron as he gets on his horse and prepare for battle. The retainer knight hurriedly came to support List. But List was still a beginner knight with low-level chi and was much stronger than ordinary people. Suppressing his nervousness, he had already mounted his horse. No matter how spirited Fiery Dragon was, it was still a young horse that hadn't been on the battlefield, so it was still nervous. List had to stretch out his hand to stroke its mane to soothe its nervousness. Humph. Fiery Dragon was encouraged by its master and its tensed body relaxed. As a birthday gift from the Count, its bloodline wasn't bad. It had the bloodline of a low-level World of Warcraft flame horse and was very adaptable. In a few breaths, Marcus sensed that World of Warcraft had already emerged from the depths of the forest. It was a huge grey wolf with 2 light green patterns on its body. It's a Windblade wolf. Low-level World of Warcraft. Retreat, I'll deal with it. Marcus raised his handgun. Although it was called a handgun, it was actually a knight's gun used for close combat. It was even longer than a person. Saying so, Marcus suddenly burst out with a roar, "Ha!" The mid-level battle energy vibrated and resonated in his mouth like a bomb going off. The huge roar shook the surrounding leaves. He hoped to scare off the Windblade wolf. The Windblade wolf lowered its body and retreated slightly. It seemed like it was going to retreat, but it was only the prelude to an attack. But Marcus clamped his horse's abdomen and rode on his yellow horse, raising his gun and attacking. The Windblade wolf also leapt and charged towards Marcus. At the same time, several light green wind blades suddenly appeared in front of it, spinning and slicing towards Marcus. The tip of the knight's spear trembled, and a faint milky white light was attached to it. It quickly hit the wind blades and scattered them one by one. After that, Marcus swung his spear behind him. The knight's spear drew an oval trajectory as it sprinted from the other side, accurately hitting the leaping Windblade wolf. In the face of danger, the Windblade wolf twisted its body and dodged the knight's spear. However, it was cut by the milky white light of the spear, causing it to bleed profusely. As soon as he landed, a few wind blades shot out randomly. Marcus became one with his horse and dodged the wind blades by a hair's breadth. At this moment, he had already pulled away from the windblade wolf. He charged forward a few times, wanting to engage in close combat. However, the windblade wolves were very smart. They kept a distance from him and released wind blades to wear him down. Another difference between World of Warcraft and normal beasts was their intelligence. Such a war of attrition was nothing compared to World of Warcraft's high mana regeneration. However, the knight's Do-Chi couldn't last long. However, Marcus used his strength to prove himself. Why did he have the confidence to go to the battlefield and fight for the noble honor of a Lord Knight? He hung up the knight's spear, turned around and pulled out the bow on his back. He shot 2 arrows at once. The arrows infused with Do-Chi shot out like lightning. A look of disdain flashed in the windblade wolf's eyes. It only needed to slightly twist its waist to avoid the arrow's attack range. However, in the next moment, the windblade wolf's disdain turned into fear. The 2 arrows actually collided with each other in the air and quickly changed direction, fiercely stabbing into the windblade wolf's back. Such profound archery, as expected of a godly archer from orders of chivalry. List, who was watching the battle, exclaimed in admiration. His nervousness had already faded. With this kind of Earth Knight protecting him, he could freely slack off at the side. The life of a lord was good. He didn't need to waste any effort to deal with the situation. He had servants to serve him in daily life, and a knight to fight for him on the battlefield. In the blink of an eye. Seeing Marcus pull out 2 more arrows, a trace of resentment flashed in the eyes of the bleeding windblade wolf. It unexpectedly turned around and fled into the jungle, disappearing from everyone's line of sight in the blink of an eye. Marcus looked in the direction where the windblade wolf disappeared and slowly put down the bow. Karl Hammerstein, who had just watched with his blood boiling, couldn't help but say, "Teacher Marcus, why didn't you chase it? With 2 more arrows, the windblade wolf would definitely be dead. That's a World of Warcraft that's even more expensive than pearls. World of Warcraft isn't the only windblade wolf in the Thorns Ridge. Moreover, it doesn't seem to be seriously injured. It just surrounded Ong and lured us in. It definitely has companions waiting for it in the jungle. If you're not afraid of death, you can go ahead and chase it," Marcus said coldly. Karl Hammerstein scratched his head, embarrassed and not daring to speak. Marcus ignored him and said to List, "Sir Baron, it's dangerous here, let's go." "Okay." List readily accepted the advice. Patrolling the territory was only for the mission, he wasn't willing to face danger. As the old saying goes, a gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall. Perhaps it was because he encountered World of Warcraft at the edge of the Thorns Ridge in spring, which made Marcus a bit worried. Therefore, he sped up the patrolling. On the way, List curiously asked, "Teacher Marcus, your archery is very powerful. It can even refract. What archery is that?" Double arrow strike is an advanced technique of ordinary archery. It can only be used as a guide with chi. This archery is very cool and very practical. "Teacher Marcus, when will you teach me archery?" List was very envious. Marcus did not respond enthusiastically. The advanced technique of archery requires the release of chi. Before becoming an Earth Knight, what Sir Baron needs to do first is to polish and strengthen his chi and learn the combat techniques of a knight, not the fancy archery. "Alright, wait until I advance to an Earth Knight, then I will learn archery," List said. After completing the mission and obtaining the chi advancement reward, it might be the moment he advanced to an Earth Knight. During the next 3 hours of the journey, they didn't encounter World of Warcraft again. After patrolling the Thorns Ridge, they arrived at the other side of the Flower Town, the Azure Wave Sea. The Grand Duchy of Sapphire was located in the northeast corner of the continent and consisted of the Sapphire Archipelago. The Coral Island was located in the northeast corner of the Sapphire Archipelago. The flower town was located in the northeast corner of the Coral Island. Therefore, at this moment, the azure sea that Liszt saw was the boundary of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire, the azure wave sea that stretched on endlessly. Teacher Marcus, what is on the other side of the sea? Are there other islands, continents, or other countries? I don't know. Sir Count's fleet has never set foot further into the sea. However, legend has it that the Devil Sea is on the other side of the azure wave sea. No one can sail in the Devil Sea. Not even by riding a dragon. Dragons are the support of a country. No dragon knight is willing to ride a dragon and venture around. There are countless lands on the continent waiting to be developed. Sir Baron, why should you care about the empty sea? To be frank, you should learn from Sir Count and occupy more land. Chapter 7. Sea water with nothing? Liszt didn't know whether he should laugh or not. In his hometown, the competition in the sea was not much less than the competition on land. A blue-water navy was the ambition of every country. The resources in the sea were not much less than those on land. Moreover, compared to the resources on land, the majority of the resources in the sea were undeveloped. Just casually scooping them up was a treasure. Deep-sea oil, methane hydrate, manganese nodules, polymetallic sulfides, and cobalt-rich crusts were all treasures. In this world, he didn't dare to determine whether or not there were mineral deposits hidden under the sea. After all, according to the information he currently had, gems and metals could only be produced by dragons. However, the fishery resources in the sea were absolutely immeasurably huge. In the Grand Duchy of Sapphire, there was a lot of uncultivated land and a severe shortage of manpower. There was not even enough land for farming, let alone developing the fishery. However, there was a crucial problem. The elves were in the hands of the aristocrats, so they could not influence so much arable land, resulting in very little arable land. Take the flower town for example. The area of arable land was not small, but the number of people it could support was very small. The smaller the population, the more they were bound to the land by the aristocrats and the aristocratic system. They had to help the aristocrats farm, collect large amounts of taxes, and support the aristocrats' extravagant lifestyle. The development direction of the flower town is this azure aquamarine sea. Liszt was on fire. As long as there was a fishery nearby, then there would be a steady supply of food. Only when the commoners were full could they work hard to have children. Only when the population was large could they collect more taxes. Only when the taxes were large could they live a better life. Of course, this was not the most urgent matter. The development of the fishery was inseparable from ships. There was still a long way to go before the flower town could build ships. With his meager savings, he could not buy many ships. Let's go. After patrolling the last stretch of the border, we will go back. Lightly raising the horsewhip, Fiery Dragon neighed and galloped along the sandy shore of the azure sea. The sand and stones were pale yellow and clean. Occasionally, there were large trees that looked like coconut trees growing, blocking the afternoon sunlight and casting shade over and over again. After a bit of development, it would become a perfect summer resort. After patrolling the beach, they returned to the starting point at the edge of the Thorns Ridge. Liszt officially completed his mission of patrolling the flower town's territory. The group rushed to the castle. After saluting, Marcus and the 4 retainer knights took their leave and went home. They were in a small town and had their own house. The castle was just a place where Liszt and his servants lived. "Master, seeing that you have returned safely, my heart is at ease." The old butler, Carter, led the servants and lined up to welcome Liszt's return. "In my territory, even if it's World of Warcraft, I still have to restrain myself," Liszt joked. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right in the castle?" "Of course." "That's good. Mrs. Morrison, help me prepare the bath water. I need to take a bath." "Yes, master." Mrs. Morrison was almost 40 years old and had never married. She had been working in Tulip Castle and was now in charge of all the maids in List Castle. Although it was said to be all the maids, there were actually only 3. And in the castle, there were only 10 servants in total. The butler, Carter, was in charge of all the affairs in the castle and could be considered as List's confidant. The female butler, Mawson Patty, was in charge of all the maids and assisted Carter in managing the daily affairs of the castle. The cook, Abby Ladle, was in charge of everything in the kitchen. The male servants were the valet, Thomas Scissors, the ordinary male servant, Tom Pigsty, and the assistant male servant, Jessie Ricewater. The female servants were the ordinary maids, Maggie Threadhead, Debbie Window, and Mike John Oxtail. There was also the cook's assistant, also a maid, but under Abby's command. Her name was Irene Four Fingers. Four Fingers, a very strange surname. Perhaps her ancestor only had 4 fingers, so when he registered his surname, he used 4 fingers. Don't expect an illiterate commoner who lived in the countryside all his life and almost never went far to come up with a nice surname. The nobles also did not allow them to have nice surnames. With Thomas's help, List took off his leather armor and went upstairs. The old butler, Carter, immediately said loudly, "Jessie, take the master's flaming dragon horse away. Remember to add more beans when feeding it. It has been working hard all day. Abby, go to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Tonight, we should add an extra portion of roast meat for the master. Mrs. Morrison, remember to bring the maids to prepare the master's bath water. Tom still has to go to town to fetch water. Thomas, you have to clean the master's leather armor." "Yes, Mr. Carter." The servants answered. Carter nodded in satisfaction. Although the castle was small, the servants were few, and the living conditions were poor, he was the butler here. He managed all the daily affairs of the castle and was the master's right-hand man. He liked this comfort and power. The temperature of the bath water was just right. Although they were not the skilled maids of Tulip Castle, under the command of Mrs. Morrison, these newly sold maids had already adapted well to their work. List lay in the bathtub, enjoying the feeling of soaking in the warm water. It was not that he had not thought of creating equality for everyone, so that the people of this world could feel the light of democracy in a civilized society. But he was very clear that these servants relied on their survival as servants of the nobles. Only by relying on the protection of the nobles could they survive. Without the servant job and identity, their lives were likely to be even more miserable when they returned to the fields. There were many serfs and freedmen who starved to death every year. In the castle, as long as they did not encounter a perverted lord, they at least did not have to worry about food and clothing. Once they struggled to the level of a butler, it was the highest identity that a commoner could hope for. "I never thought that one day, I, List, would have so many people counting on me to live." His thoughts wandered. He began to be lost in thought. Soon, smoke serpentines appeared before his eyes. The serpentines changed. They were no longer the previous text, but new text, mission completed. Reward, Chi upgrade. List was excited. He was ready to receive his reward, but he suddenly discovered that he did not know how to receive his reward. Just as he was about to study how to receive his reward, the serpentines before his eyes scattered into smoke, before quickly forming new serpentines. Mission: a serious crisis has occurred in the territory's peanut settlement. A large area of the peanut fields has undergone an unknown mutation. The farmers are helpless and are about to experience a decrease in production. As the Lord, you should resolve the problem. Reward: a sprite worm. Oh, a new mission. The reward is a sprite worm. This is a good thing. List was happy at first, but then he became depressed. But, what about the reward for the previous task? Where is the advancement of Chi? Who can tell me how to receive this reward? At this moment, List was vexed. He sensed that there was no change in his Chi. He tossed and turned until the water turned cold, yet he still did not receive the mission reward. It was to the extent that he seriously suspected that he was hallucinating. The smoke simply did not exist. After putting on his clothes, he walked out of the bathroom. Liszt had a gloomy face, causing Thomas, who was waiting outside, to let his imagination run wild. "Master, your complexion is not good, is it?" "I'm fine. You go ahead with your work. I'm going to the study to read." After entering the study, Liszt wanted to calm down and read. But his mind was in a mess, and he could not calm down. He simply changed into a set of training clothes and practiced in the castle's small garden. He was learning the basic Qi, which was the most widely circulated low-level Qi secret manual. Apart from the Qi secret manuals of some big clans, this secret manual was the best basic Qi secret manual. Low-level Qi was just Qi, used to strengthen the body, nothing more. After completing the set of movements and venting out his resentment, he finally felt a bit better, and his mood gradually calmed down. At this moment, a cool breeze blew past. Liszt's eyes suddenly shone, as if an inspiration had flashed through his mind, allowing him to grasp it. Immediately afterward, he once again performed all the training movements of the basic Qi. When he finished this time, the low-level Qi inside his body seemed to have reached a critical point and began to transform. It gushed out from the invisible meridians and poured into every cell in his body. Qi upgrade. Chapter 8. It was as if a stormy sea had broken out in his body. Boiling power surged through his limbs and bones. The originally calm and gentle primary Qi had completely poured into his cells. It seemed that the cells were undergoing a transformation. When the new Qi returned from the cells to the meridians, it had already been thoroughly transformed. The newly born Qi had become mid-ranked Qi and had a unique attribute. Liszt stood quietly in the small garden, motionless. His mood was like a flower in full bloom. He tried to suppress his excitement and experienced the newly born mid-ranked Qi. The mission was real, and it had already brought him a sublimation of Qi. He had now truly become an Earth Knight. For Qi cultivation, this was a temporary new starting point. The Earth Knight represented true extraordinary power. My Qi attribute is fire, which is a bit conflicting with the water attribute of the thousand-layered waves. It seems that I have to prepare a new mid-ranked Qi secret book. I originally thought that I would awaken a water-attributed Qi like the Count's family. Liszt was not very satisfied with the fire attribute. Water, fire, earth, wind, thunder, ice, light, and darkness. There was also the metal attribute represented by dragons and the wood attribute represented by elves, both of which had magical properties. There was no distinction between high and low attributes, it was just a power attribute. However, the Tulip family had been studying water-attributed Qi since before they had obtained the Count's fief. The thousand-layered waves was also a top-notch water-attributed secret book, which contained a lot of cultivation experience. The younger generation would get twice the result with half the effort. However, it was not suitable for Liszt to cultivate the thousand-layered waves. If he forced himself to cultivate it, he would only get half the result with twice the effort. Fire-attributed Qi was naturally more suitable for cultivating fire-attributed secret books. Teacher Marcus is of the wind attribute and cultivates the Against the Wind Breaker secret book, which is also incompatible with my attribute. Let me think, when I was in the Night Academy, I came into contact with the Fire Surge secret book. In a few days, I will arrange for Teacher Marcus to return to Coral City and fetch it for me. During this period of time, his mid-ranked Qi needed to be nurtured and stabilized, so he was not in a hurry to cultivate the secret book. In fact, Liszt was not in a hurry to improve his strength. It was true that aristocrats had to go to the battlefield, but Coral Island was far away from the continent, so there were very few battles. As the Count's third son, the aristocrats of the Coral Island would not look for trouble with him, so he could develop with peace of mind. Moreover, no matter how powerful one's cultivation was, he would still be nothing more than a handful of dirt in 100 years. It would be nice to be a lord and enjoy the service of servants. He could just leave the fighting and killing to his subordinates. Of course, being able to advance to an Earth Knight is still an exciting thing. This means that it's basically very difficult for me to fall sick. My resistance to cold and heat has also greatly increased. In this world, is there anything better than being healthy and living to a ripe old age? He heaved a long sigh of relief. List's excitement had already calmed down. He turned around and walked towards the castle. The valet trotted over, trying to find something to serve him. "Master, you've just finished your night training. Do you need me to prepare your bath water again? Will it be troublesome?" "Of course not. It's our honor to serve you." "All right, prepare another bath." Dinner. Marcus and Gord arrived as scheduled. "List, your complexion is getting healthier. It seems that you have fully recovered. This is worth a drink." Gord picked up a glass of wine and took a few deep breaths. He was addicted to wine. This was a common problem among aristocrats. Marcus's eyes flickered. "Sir Baron, you broke through?" "Just an hour ago, I had a feeling that my chi cultivation has made new progress," List said in a reserved manner. After all, breaking through to an Earth Knight at the age of 16 was not something to be proud of. "Congratulations, sir," said Marcus solemnly. His tone had changed slightly. Originally, he had to call him Baron, but now, he directly addressed him as Sir. This was a good change. Gord immediately exclaimed, "Wow, this is really great news. No wonder when I went out today, the magpies were circling around the town and chirping. List, you are indeed the son of the Earl. You have inherited the excellent bloodline of the Tulip family. You will definitely grasp power. Compared to my brother and sister, my aptitude is not outstanding. I can only make up for it by practicing harder. If you can think like this, it proves that you are also excellent. The great figures in history did not always perform well at a young age. Striving to catch up and keep improving is the creed of a knight. I see such a quality in you. Thank you for the compliment, Teacher Gort. So tonight, we have to celebrate and drink a few more glasses." Gort smiled and turned to Butler Carter and said, "Mr. Carter, in order to celebrate List's promotion to an Earth Knight, shouldn't you take out the good wine from the castle's wine cellar and celebrate the moment of glory?" Old Carter smiled. "I think so too, Mr. Gort." However, he did not move. Whether to drink wine or not, the castle master had to decide. List did not disappoint him and nodded. "Mr. Carter, please take out a bottle of crescent wine and prepare a pudding for each gentleman and lady." "As you wish, master." Carter turned and left, going downstairs to the wine cellar. Passing by the kitchen door, he said, "Mrs. Abby, master has rewarded everyone with an extra pudding for dinner." Abby Ladle, a fat woman, shouted, "Cream pudding? Oh, my God, master is too generous, there is no need to do this. The maid can eat anything, and we don't have much cream in storage." The kitchen maid Irene, who was mopping the floor, raised her head expectantly. "Mr. Carter, can the kitchen maid also add a pudding?" "Of course, today is a joyous day, master has advanced to an Earth Knight." "Oh, my God, master is so great!" Abby exclaimed in admiration, turned around and shouted, "Irene, what are you still standing there for? Hurry up and finish mopping the floor, then go to the storeroom and bring the cream over. Today is master's joyous day, he will give you the pudding that you can only eat on holidays. Cheer up and work." "Got it, Mrs. Abby, praise master." Crescent wine. It was a specialty of Coral Island, brewed from grapes picked on the first new moon in autumn. Tulip Castle had a grape lesser. Among the grapes grown, there was a special variety used to make wine. The taste was not as good, but the wine brewed was sweet and piercingly cold. It was a superior wine, famous in the Grand Duchy of Sapphire. Every year, the court would come to purchase a batch. When Liszt left Tulip Castle, he brought a box with him. A bottle of crescent wine that has been stored in the cellar for a long time, like an old story fluttering from the deep passage of time, quietly telling you what is true beauty, what is the taste of eternity. Gort shook the crystal goblet, watching the bright red liquid rise and fall along the crystal wall, as if he was a poet expressing his emotions. Liszt took a sip. To be honest, he didn't think that wine was good to drink. He didn't like any kind of wine, he only liked to eat fermented wine. His body inherited from his predecessor had a certain ability to taste wine, and he was also very adaptable to various tastes of wine. Therefore, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, he drank some wine when he had nothing to do. In any case, without highly distilled wine, it was very difficult to get drunk. Right, Teacher Gort, is there a problem with the peanut settlement's peanuts? He suddenly remembered his new mission. His chi had already sublimated, so he was very eager for a new reward. Oh, it is indeed so. Maybe this year's weather is not very good, the peanut settlement is probably going to fail. I have sent people to check, a large area of the peanut fields has withered and turned yellow. In a few days, they will die. Poor serfs, they have to starve before winter. Although he said it was pitiful, Gort didn't have the least bit of sympathy on his face. Liszt put down the goblet. Chapter 9. The maroon fiery dragon carrying the Earth Knight Liszt crossed the muddy land and arrived at the peanut settlement. The peanut settlement was a much smaller settlement than a village, with 7 or 8 thatched cottages scattered about. What are you staring at? Seeing that Sir Lord has arrived, why aren't you kneeling and saluting? The town's clerks nimbly knocked on the doors of every peasant household. The people living here were all serfs. They came out of the leaky houses, their faces numb from the oppression of life. They stood woodenly at the doorway, not knowing what to do. Only after being berated by the clerks did they kneel on the ground and salute in Liszt's direction. The actions of adults were all numb. Only a few bare-bottom children raised their heads from time to time, sizing up Liszt with their dirty but bright big eyes. Then, an adult would slap them on the head, making them kneel on the ground with their foreheads almost touching the ground. Who is the supervisor of the peanut settlement? Liszt asked. Gort sat on his horse as if this matter had nothing to do with him. He did not know who the person in charge of the peanut settlement was. A clerk answered, in reply to Sir, it is the lame elder George. Invite him over. The clerk quickly dragged an old man who had a limp leg and could not walk properly over. The old man was wearing patched clothes, his withered body looking like a lamp that could go out at any time. Sir Lord, Elder George is here. The clerk shoved the old man, seemingly wanting the old man to salute. However, the old man looked very nervous, standing woodenly, not knowing what to do. Liszt waved his hand, having the clerk withdraw. He said mildly, Elder George, don't be nervous. I am the Flower Town's lord, Baron Liszt Tulip. I heard that there is a problem with the peanut settlement's peanuts. Take us to the fields and see if we can solve the problem. Oh, Baron. Sir Lord. Elder George stammered nervously. I'll lead the way. Thank God, the peanut settlement is saved. Sir Lord has come to save us. Elder George was so excited that he could even walk with the wind. Liszt had inspected the farmland before, but he had only stood outside and glanced at it. Only now did he really look at the farmland carefully. Because they were all serfs' fields, there were no ridges. Each strip of farmland was divided by a ravine, and different serfs cultivated different fields. Almost 90% of the output of the farmlands belonged to the nobles, in other words, Liszt. The remaining 10% was their rations. At this moment, the peanut field, which was supposed to be green, was now covered in patches of green and yellow. All the peanuts were wilted and lying on the ground, half dead. The land was moist. Obviously, the serfs had watered the peanuts a lot. Unfortunately, watering the peanuts could not make them grow. Elder George wiped his tears and said excitedly, "Sir Lord, we haven't been lazy. We have been watering the peanuts 3 times a day, but the peanuts are still dying. Only the peanuts in Archie's field have not wilted, but they are also about to be unable to endure. Some of the leaves are starting to turn yellow." Following the direction of Elder George's finger, List saw the long field in the center of the peanut settlement's farmland. The center of the long field was green. Compared to the yellow-green peanuts around it, it was a lot more spirited. List dismounted from his horse and walked into the farmland. He bent down to pull out a yellow peanut sprout and was about to carefully observe it when Gort suddenly said, "List, you shouldn't touch this dirty work. If you need anything, just let the serfs do it." Although he was a down-and-out lord knight, he looked down on commoners even more than the average aristocrat. List didn't pay attention to him. Instead, he repeatedly observed the peanut sprout in his hand to determine the cause. He wasn't an agronomist, but he had farmed when he was a child and was no stranger to agriculture. The peanuts of the two worlds were similar in some aspects, but also unfamiliar in some aspects. However, he could basically determine that the peanut sprout in his hand was malnourished, resulting in its current state. "Do you use ash or dung to water the fields?" "What?" Elder George was puzzled. "Sir Lord, we have watered them 3 times a day." List asked, "Don't you use fertilizer?" Elder George stared blankly for a moment before asking in reply, "What is fertilizer?" He doesn't even know what fertilizer is. List was speechless. "How do you grow peanuts?" Elder George rambled on for a long time. Basically, the weeds that grew in autumn and winter were burned down the following year, and then the peanuts were planted. After planting, they were watered and weeded. Generation after generation, they were planted in this way, but the harvest was especially low. Only the aristocrats could use sprites to influence the growth of plants and achieve the goal of high yields. List understood. List could not help but shake his head. Without fertilizer, even the best land would become barren after planting it a few times. The vast farmland before his eyes was about to become barren. It was no wonder the peanuts were dying, they were starving to death. But then, List became doubtful. Why are the peanuts not starving to death before? According to Elder George, they planted it every year, and apart from droughts and floods, there had never been any similar phenomenon. Therefore, there might be another reason for the peanut field's nutritional deficiency. What is the reason? List's gaze fell on the green patch at the center of the field, and he pondered seriously. Suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration as he recalled the mission's reward. The mission required him to treat the peanut field, and the reward was a sprite worm. According to the way he had obtained the reward for his first mission, List felt that a sprite worm would not appear out of thin air. It was probably something he had picked up along the way. The reward is a sprite worm, the peanut field is malnourished. Standing up, List already had an answer in his mind. "I'm afraid that the peanut field is malnourished because of the sprite worm that the mission is supposed to reward me with. Sprite worms are born from plants, so my sprite worm should be a peanut sprite worm." List waved his hand and called out to everyone, "Let's take a look at the center of the field." Everyone tiptoed and arrived at the center of the peanut field, where the peanut sprouts were still flourishing. List rummaged through his memories. When he was a child, he had seen the collection of sprite worms. Generally speaking, there was a jade-like silkworm-like sprite worm hidden in the flower or bud of a plant. Different sprite worms had different decorative patterns. At present, he had 4 sprite worms, 1 tulip sprite worm, 1 thorn sprite worm, 1 corn sprite worm, and 1 alfalfa sprite worm. The breeding of sprite worms needed to be coordinated with farming. At present, Gort was still looking for a suitable farmland for breeding sprite worms. After rummaging for a while, List did not find a peanut sprite that was pregnant with a sprite worm. Probably because the time is not up yet and the nutrition is not up to speed, the peanut sprite worm will probably abort. List could not help but clench his fists. Sprite worms represented productivity, he could not fail this mission. Thinking of this, he said to everyone, I roughly understand the reason. Elder George, now, follow my instructions and treat this peanut field. Praise be to Sir Lord. Elder George wept tears of joy. Gort asked in astonishment, List, you really found the problem? Can you still plant peanuts? What caused the peanuts to die? I can't say for now, but it will be clear in a few days. For the sake of being conservative, List did not say the reason. He was also worried that he had guessed wrong. If there was no Sprite at all, wouldn't he have made a mistake? Chapter 10. The germination of Sprite worms required a lot of nutrients. The poor peanut field restricted the Sprite worm's development, leading to the concentration of nutrients. Apart from the center of the field, the peanut sprouts in other places were on the verge of dying. The remedy was very simple. Fertilizing the peanut field would suffice. List recalled his knowledge of farming and said to Elder George, Elder George, I have a few things to tell you. First, mobilize the peasant households to gather firewood and withered grass, then set them on fire and collect the remaining plant ash. Second, mobilize the able-bodied peasant households to dig the pond, only the bottom layer of the pond. Third, have the children pick up the feces, no matter what kind of feces it is. Elder George didn't question the Sir Lord's command, Yes, Sir Lord. Elder George will certainly complete Sir's command. Elder George limped away. List then said to Gort, Teacher Gort, the peanut settlement's feces are probably not enough. Go to the town and organize all the peasant households to pick up the feces. Let's do it this way. Let's purchase the feces in the name of an administrative official. 1 basket of feces will be priced at 1 copper coin. Copper coins, silver coins, gold coins, and dragon coins were the world's common currency. However, the gold, silver, and copper coins issued by different empires, kingdoms, and grand duchies were different. The copper coins List spoke of were the currency of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire. 1 copper coin could buy 4 brick-sized loaves of black bread, enough for an adult to eat for a day. 1 silver coin could be exchanged for 100 copper coins, and 1 gold coin could be exchanged for 100 silver coins. As for the dragon coin, its full name was Sapphire Dragon Coin. It was a gem coin with the magic power of the Grand Duchy's sole sapphire dragon attached to it. It could be exchanged for 10,000 gold coins and was a magic item in itself. Upon hearing this, Gort couldn't help but complain, Wow, List, why are you spending so much money to buy dirty and lowly feces? Apart from stinking and polluting the nose, that feces has no other meaning. No, feces are very useful. You just need to publish it. Also, find a place to pile feces. It's best if it's a wasteland far away from the wind. List understood the value of feces very well. In this era where there were no chemical fertilizers and there were not enough elves, the best source of fertilizer for farming was feces. As a landlord who owned all the land in the flower town, List had to plant a lot of fields, so there had to be plenty of fertilizer. Moreover, he did not want his own town to be littered with feces and urine. That kind of environment was simply trampling on civilization. He was prepared to buy feces for a long time. Firstly, it was for composting, and secondly, it was for sanitation. It was impossible to promote toilets for the time being. Buying feces was the most cost-effective and labor-saving method. But this price is too high. 1 copper coin should buy 10 baskets, no, 20 baskets. Just do as I say, Teacher Gort. List's tone was slightly stern. Only then did Gort stop complaining and spread his hands. As you wish. In this day and age, the Lord was the authority. No one dared to shirk List's orders. Therefore, the clerks and the serfs acted very quickly. The pond mud, feces, and plant ashes that he wanted were already piled up in the peanut settlement. Very good. Elder George, take some people and mix these things together. Then, dig a hole next to the root of each peanut sprout, sprinkle a bit of these things inside, and then bury them. Then, water and weed them more. I believe that the peanut sprout will recover very soon. Riding on Fiery Dragon, List happily directed the peanut settlement serfs to fertilize the peanut fields. As the lord, he naturally would not do the work himself. The aristocratic system did not allow it, and he himself was not willing. The peanut settlement's peanut fields had a total area of about 100 mu, which was about the size of 10 football fields or 7 or 8 elementary schools. The peanut settlement serfs had a total of 23 households and a total of 92 people. The 92 serfs, excluding the children who could not work and the serfs transferred from the town, had a total of 120 people working busily. Teacher Gorky, what is the total population of the flower town? Sorry, List. I have only been in the town for a short time and have yet to sort it out. Gort was confused. He turned around and asked a clerk, you have lived in the town for many years, do you know how many households and how many people there are? More than 1,000 people? I do not know, sir. The clerk shook his head. Gort looked at another clerk. The clerk also shook his head. As a result, no one in the entire flower town knew how many people there were in the town. List was speechless. Was the flower town a forgotten town? Had the Coral Islands administrative officials not come to count the population? Had the former administrative officials not come to count the population? We need to do a thorough census of the population. A lord who doesn't even know the population under his rule is truly speechless. With this in mind, he had already issued an order, Teacher Gort, organize people and make the best use of time to arrange a census. I want to know how many households and people there are in the flower town, each person's name and family relationship, as well as their occupation, age, gender, and marital status. List, as you know, there are too few officials in the town. We do not have a financial officer, a defense officer, a legal officer, or a diplomat. In fact, we do not even have an administrative official. I should serve as your advisor, not the town's administrative official. In an aristocratic fief, the civil officials were basically headed by an advisor. They were in charge of administrative officials, financial officers, defense officers, legal officers, and diplomats. The military officials were orders of chivalry and were in charge of orders of chivalry. There was no doubt that Gort, as a down-and-out lord knight, was still an aristocrat at the lowest level of the aristocratic system. He followed List because he wanted to serve as an advisor. The other knight teacher, Marcus, should serve as orders of chivalry. As for whether the flower town could afford to support orders of chivalry, that was another matter. Don't worry, Teacher Gort. The flower town is still waiting to be rebuilt. My castle is also waiting to rise. First, manage the flower town's government affairs for me and complete the census. List did not want to immediately hand over the position of advisor to Gort. Not because he was afraid of being overthrown, but because Gort's mind was full of the aristocratic system. He was not down to earth and could not keep up with his development ideas. Very well, List, you are already an adult and have the idea of a qualified lord. I will obey your orders. Gort saluted with one hand, showing his self-restraint as an aristocrat. He was neither anxious nor impatient. For 3 days in a row, the peanut settlement was in full swing with fertilization. This was a farming battle. The 100 mu of land was quickly fertilized with a mixture of pond mud, excrement, and plant ash. In particular, the central field was fertilized with several times the amount of fertilizer. List also came here to direct for 3 days. When everything was finished, he could only continue to wait for the peanut fields to turn for the better. I have done everything that can be done. I hope that the mission will be completed soon. He was not a person who was entangled. When the work here was finished, he quickly moved on to other fief affairs. Chapter 11. Teacher Gort, how is the progress in finding a suitable place to settle the sprite worms? They have been asleep for a month. I hope to revive them as soon as possible rather than consume their potential. Sprite worms were magical little creatures. They could recognize their master. So long as they bit a finger and used a drop of blood as a guide, a magic contract could be established. They were the spirits of nature, the essence of plants, and also the emissaries of magic. By planting their worm stalks, they could influence the growth of the surrounding plants. The worm stalk was the plant that gave birth to sprite worms. It could be regarded as a life-bound magic treasure belonging to the sprite worm. It could be stored and released. It could be planted and dormant. The growth of the worm stalk was the growth of the sprite worm. Once the worm stalk died, the sprite worm would also die. Currently, the worm stalks were in the stomachs of the 4 sprite worms. Without nourishment, the sprite worms could only sleep. This was not only a waste of productivity, but also a delay in the evolution of sprite worms. No sprite worm could evolve into a lesser sprite just by sleeping. They had to constantly absorb nutrients and influence the growth of crops in order to evolve. Despite the low hopes, List still wanted to try whether his sprite worm could evolve into a lesser sprite. Gort replied, "The alfalfa worm is suitable to be planted in the dairy farm. There is a large grassland there. It should be possible to change the grass species to alfalfa. It is very difficult to find a suitable place for the millet worm. The flower town mainly grows wheat, no one grows millet. Tulip worm is naturally to be planted in the flower farm, even though that place is almost deserted. As for the thorn sprite worm, List, you know that this worm has no value. I don't care if it has value or not. What I need is for them to have a field to grow. I can plant alfalfa and tulip worms first. The lazy serfs should start moving. However, List, I need manpower. The clerks are lazy fellows, they can't get anything done. You can enlist the town's commoners at will. The castle will pay their salaries." Heavens, the castle pays salaries? You are truly a generous lord. However, there are practically no literate people in the flower town. You also want me to organize a census. They can't even write their own names. I can guarantee that they can't do anything. You can't count on the commoners. This was a problem. There was no school in the flower town, and there was no education here. It was really unreliable for illiterate people to become officials. Teacher Gort, do you know any literate people who are willing to settle down in the flower town? As long as they are willing to serve as officials, I can pay them at least twice the salary of the officials in other cities. My castle should still have a lot of gold coins. No matter how unfavored he was, List was still the count's son. After his coming-of-age ceremony, he received a lot of gold coins. Gort was silent for a moment, seemingly deliberating. List, I can see that you have great ambitions for the flower town. I do know some people with insight who didn't achieve their ambitions. However, as your tutor, I must remind you that it is already very strenuous for the flower town to support a lord. With another group of people, it would be unbearable. I understand. Don't worry, I will take care of it. You can invite all of them over. List said casually. If he gave talent to others, he would be able to create wealth. In his view, the flower town was a virgin land that had not been exploited. Although there were no sprites, and it was very difficult to rely on farming to make a fortune, but farming was not the only way to create wealth. At the same time, there was a voice in his mind, I have the smoke mission, my cheat. Maybe it can bring me even more wealth. They were discussing business. The old butler Carter knocked on the door and came in. Master, the peanut settlement's elder George has come to see you. Oh, what is it? He said that the peanut settlement's peanuts have been restored to green overnight. In the central field that you specially instructed me to look after, there is a flower that has grown a very big bud. Is that so? Let him in. List was very pleasantly surprised. He had not expected that the peanut field would be restored to normal after applying fertilizer. He almost couldn't wait to find a place to stare blankly and see if the smoke mission had been updated. By the time Elder George nervously tiptoed into the castle, List had already regained his calm. "Elder George, tell me about the peanut settlement in detail." "Yes, Sir Lord. Your great brilliance has shone on every corner of the peanut settlement." Just as Carter had reported, the peanut settlement had been restored to green overnight. A peanut had mutated and grown a very big bud. The serfs were overjoyed. Elder George, disregarding his lame leg, ran like the wind and asked to see the Lord while gasping for breath. The former numb and despairing expression in his eyes had been replaced by hope. Gort had already reacted, his mouth wide open. "Oh, heavens! List, could it be that the peanut field has given birth to a peanut sprite?" List smiled faintly. "It is very likely." "Oh, heavens! List, you are truly a heaven-favored aristocrat. For such a remote rural town like the Flower Town to actually give birth to a sprite worm, incredible. Whether it is incredible or not, we will know once we take a look. Mr. Carter, prepare a horse for me, I want to go to the peanut settlement." "As you wish, master." At the castle gate, List and Gort mounted their respective mounts. Carter asked, "Master, your retainer knight has yet to arrive, would you like to wait for a moment?" Thomas took a step forward, wanting to say something, yet not daring to open his mouth. List noticed. He gave Thomas and Elder George a slight glance, before saying, "Thomas, follow me on a horse." Take Elder George as well." As if hearing heavenly music, Thomas was so excited that his body trembled. "Thomas is at your service, master." This was the first time the Sir Lord had gone out, when he had asked him to serve him. The meaning of a valet was the same as that of an attendant, a trusted aide of an aristocrat. Many greater aristocrats' valets were knight attendants who fought side by side with them on the battlefield. 4 people, 3 horses. Fiery Dragon took the lead, galloping as fast as lightning to the peanut settlement. As far as the eye could see, the peanut field, which was still yellow yesterday, was already lush green, with all the peanut sprouts stretching their branches and leaves to their heart's content. It was currently spring, not yet the flowering season. However, the largest peanut sprouts in the center of the field had a fist-sized flower bud on its stem, waiting to bloom. The delicate emerald green color was particularly delightful. This is truly a sprite worm's flower bud. Heaven-favored, List, the Flower Town is a heaven-favored place. Gort shouted somewhat exaggeratedly. List was actually very excited inwardly, yet he still wore the reserved and gentle smile of an aristocrat on his face. The sprite worm plays a vital role in the Flower Town's agriculture. Therefore, this peanut field must be protected. Elder George, you and the serfs have to send people to guard it every day. Sir Lord, Elder George has to guard it even if he has to eat or drink. If he doesn't eat or drink, then there is no need. Have people take turns keeping watch. List said to Thomas behind him, "Go back and tell my retainer knight that I need one of them to be stationed in the peanut settlement every day to guard the sprite worm." Chapter 12. As the sprite worm had yet to be born, it was impossible for List to foolishly wait here. Therefore, after arranging for someone to keep watch, he returned to the castle. The Flower Town only had contact with the outside world through the Thorns Ridge. Very few people came and went. Only when the Count came to collect taxes would a caravan follow the night team. Now that the Flower Town had become List's territory, with no one coming to collect taxes, the caravans might not be willing to come. Therefore, nobody would have any ideas about sprite worms. As for the Flower Town's residents, no one dared to have any ideas about the sprite worm. Sprite worms were the darlings of nature. They would only establish a master-slave contract with humans with magic power. Perhaps World of Warcraft could do the same, but World of Warcraft did not have such an idea. Magic power referred to Douqi and magic. Although their manifestations were different, their essence was the same. In Flower Town, there were only 3 people with magic power: List, Marcus, and Gort. Marcus and Gort were famous on the Coral Island. Even if they stole the sprite worms, they could not run away. On the Coral Island, no one dared to touch the things of the Tulip family. List was a member of the Tulip family. Therefore, there was no need to worry about the safety of the peanut sprite worm. He went to his study room, closed the door, and concentrated for a moment, waiting for the smoke to appear. After repeated experiments, he had completely grasped the pattern of the smoke's appearance. He just needed to calm down and he would be able to see it. As expected. 1 minute later. Twisting serpentines appeared before his eyes. Mission completed. Reward, 1 peanut sprite worm. Just as I thought, the peanut sprite is the reward for the previous mission. I don't know how this smoke mission appeared, but it doesn't seem to give out rewards out of thin air. The rewards are all things that exist in reality, or are things that are about to happen. The improvement of my fighting aura is probably a result of my accumulation, and the peanut sprite should have appeared in the first place. However, without the smoke mission, these rewards would probably be wasted. He reckoned that he would still be a trainee knight, and the peanut sprite worm would also quietly die. At this time, the twisted smoke serpentines had already appeared. Quest: how can the lord of a territory not even know the number of citizens? Please complete a census of the territory and understand the basic situation of the citizens. Reward: new type of tulip. Census? Isn't that what I was planning to do? It seems that the smoke mission is updating the content according to my actual situation. A new type of tulip, what does this mean? Is it going to give me a magic potion? List guessed. The tulip family grew stronger because of tulip. Tulips were not only a kind of flower, but also a magic ingredient, a medicinal ingredient with magic power. Magic potions were important supplementary materials to assist in the cultivation of magic and Douqi. In List's memory, the most expensive tulip potion could be sold for a sky-high price of 10 gold coins. The new breed of tulip, if there was a magic potion, would definitely be a great weapon to revitalize the economy. Even if it wasn't a magic potion, contributing it to the tulip castle and allowing the great tulip elves of the family to assimilate it would also increase the great elves' evolution and development potential. Then, the next step is to vigorously promote the census. A small town with a population of 1 or 2,000 at most, what is so troublesome about it? Gort really disappoints me. If worse comes to worst, I will personally supervise it. A population of 1 or 2,000 was not much compared to a school in List's hometown. List, who had been the president of the Academy's student council, had a lot of confidence in his own abilities. But for Gort, this was an extremely tricky task. At the time of the handover, he had asked the former administrative officer, a knight sent by the Sir Count. The knight had only done one thing in the Flower Town, that was, collecting taxes. The knight didn't care about anything else. Even the knight himself hardly ever came to the Flower Town. He let his retainer knight manage it on his behalf. The retainer knight also only did one thing, collect taxes. He didn't care about anything else. The Flower Town's taxes included peanuts, milk, wheat, barley, oats, tomatoes, and tulip. The Earl of Coral Island collected taxes every 3 months, taking away most of the crops that the Flower Town didn't produce. After collecting taxes, the knight no longer cared about the Flower Town. How could a remote and desolate place compare to the bustling Coral City? Therefore, Gort sat in the dilapidated administrative office room and looked at his 4 clerks and 6 patrolmen. He felt that the census was an impossible task. None of you have ever read a book or read a word? There is not a single scholar in the entire town. A clerk said embarrassedly, "Sir, there is no school in the town, and we have never left the town." The patrolman with a bright red nose said, maybe the old leathersmith knows how to read. He came from another island. I saw a book in his house. It was such a thick book. I even flipped through it and there were drawings of people inside. However, the old leathersmith beat me up. He is blind, his leather shoes are especially sturdy, and he is also very good at beating people up. A blind man, Gort didn't even think about it and ignored the old leathersmith. Since there was no one who could read, he could only say, "You should know how to count. Each of you go to a settlement and count the number of households and people in the settlement." This should have been a simple task. But after a day, when the clerks and patrolmen came back to report, Gort felt like going crazy. He berated loudly, "What? There are 18 households and 56 people in the peanut settlement? Mr. Teacup, are you trying to make me laugh?" Mr. Teacup, whose full name was David Teacup, was a clerk. He had a confused expression on his face. "Sir, I didn't. I have counted several times, but I don't know if I am right or not. The number is different every time. There were 23 households and 92 people in the peanut settlement." This was the number that Gort had personally calculated when List had rescued the peanut fields. He really couldn't figure out why David Teacup could count 18 households and 56 people. There was no need to think about it. The numbers of households and people in the other settlements were definitely also nonsense. Thinking of this, Gort powerlessly waved his hand. "All right, no need to report. You can keep the numbers for yourselves to play with. Go and bring my horse over. I want to go to the castle to see Baron List." Riding his horse to the castle, Gort complained to List with an exaggerated expression, "You simply don't know that those clerks and patrolmen can't even count from 1 to 10. We simply can't rely on them to complete the census. List, I have already written a letter and only need to send it out. Perhaps we can wait for them to arrive before doing the census. How long do we have to wait?" "Don't worry, List. We have enough time, don't we?" "I can't wait." List rapped his finger on the table. "Mr. Carter, who in the castle can read?" Carter slightly bowed and said, "My lord, I can write letters and read books. Thomas can as well." Mrs. Morrison should also be able to." "In that case, I will have to trouble Mrs. Morrison and Thomas to come over. In addition, help me call Teacher Marcus and my 4 retainer knight over. I remember that they can all write." Chapter 13. Hurry up, damn big blockhead, dawdling, are you courting death? Sir Lord wants to count your family's situation. Hurry up, put on your clothes, bring your wife and children over, and gather in the open space in front. Be careful, or else I'll break your legs." The patrolman swaggered and slammed the door of the thatched hut, shouting into the house. Soon, the entire Barley settlement's serfs came out of their homes and gathered in the open space under the scolding of the patrolman. They whispered in 2s and 3s. From time to time, they would look up at the table in the middle of the open space. Behind the table sat a 40-year-old woman, dressed in a decent dark green dress, sorting out a stack of thick bast paper. Behind the woman, there was a young maid helping to melt the ink in the teapot. "Who is that? I've never seen her before." "Idiot, she must be a maid from the castle." Yes, look at her clothes, she's definitely ironed. Only Sir Lord's maids can wear such neat and clean clothes, unlike us, who stink and are wrinkled. What does Sir Lord want to do?" "I heard from the henchman that he wants to count." "Count what?" "Count the population." An old serf chewed some kind of grass root in his mouth. 10 years ago, Sir Count sent someone to count. At that time, our Barley settlement had a lot of serfs, much more than we have now. Oh, a lot of people starved to death in the heavy snow 7 years ago. In front of the table. The patrolman, who was swaggering and blustering just a moment ago, bowed and said to the 2 maids, "Mrs. Morrison, Miss Mike John, all the serfs in the Barley settlement have been gathered. I'm not a miss, I'm just a maid from the castle. Mike John Oxtail was actually very happy to be called a Mississippi. She asked with a smile, "Is everyone here? Don't miss anyone, or Sir Lord will punish us, including you." Of course, I can guarantee that they won't dare to hide." Mrs. Morrison nodded. "Well then, you go and have them come one by one. After counting the serfs, you can go home directly and don't come back to register." "Okay." The patrol began to lead the serfs to the table one by one. According to what List had prepared, Mrs. Morrison asked, "Are you a parent? What's your name?" "Hua." "Hope, Mrs. Don't be nervous. This is your full name, including your surname, Mr. Hope." "Oh, okay, my name is Hope Rotten Water." "So, Mr. Hope, is everyone in your family here?" "A total of 5. What is the name of your wife? What are the names of your 2 sons and daughters? How old are you? What is your occupation? What is your responsibility? Is it the same with your wife? Is your eldest son working?" Soon after, Mrs. Morrison finished her questioning and began to record the information on thick bast paper. Serf head, Hope Rotten Water, age 37, grows barley, able-bodied. Wife, Simone Rotten Water, age 34, grows barley, able-bodied. Eldest son, Lobo Rotten Water, age 20, grows oats, is lame. Second son, Peter Rotten Water, age 17, grows barley, able-bodied. Daughter, Lily Rotten Water, age 15, raises chickens, is able-bodied. After recording the information, Mrs. Morrison verified it again. After confirming that there was no mistake, she said gently, "Mr. Hope, Mrs., your family can go back." "Oh, okay." This scene only lasted for a day. Stacks of thick bast paper were sent to List's desk in the castle, announcing the completion of the census of the flower town. "List, it is really incredible. Such a difficult task was easily solved by you. You will definitely be a qualified lord." Gort exclaimed in admiration. "Teacher Gort, let's put aside the praises for now. Give me the statistics of each settlement. I am at your service." Perhaps it was List's swift and decisive actions that put pressure on Gort, making him, a follower who had not yet become an advisor, to light candles and work at night. Early the next morning, the statistical data had already appeared in front of List, who had finished breakfast and had finished his night cultivation class. "Master, Sir Gort stayed up all night. His eyes were bloodshot when he delivered the data," said Carter, holding the thick bast paper. "Good wine and good food. I have to do something in return. The flower town needs to develop. I don't want my fief to be as lifeless as it was in the past." Carter was a bit absent-minded. After a few seconds, he responded, "Master, I seem to have seen Sir Count when he was young, a high-spirited viscount. In 5 years, he was promoted to count and established the Tulip family's rule over the Coral Island. With you as the lord of the flower town, it is the fortune of all the subjects. Maybe." List was not modest. He quietly flipped through the thick bast paper. In fact, there was not much content in the thick stack. Even if it was written with a quill, it still could not record many mosquitoes. Thick bast paper is really backward. "Master, we don't have much thick bast paper left. We have already used up 4/5 of the thick bast paper." "I know, I will find a way to solve it." Papermaking had long been placed on List's schedule. He just had to wait for the right time to complete it. After spending half an hour, all the data of the flower town was clear. There were a total of 8 settlements. In the town, there were 257 households and 907 people. Among them, 41 households and 125 people were freedmen, the rest were serfs. In the peanut settlement, there were 23 households and 92 people, all serfs. In the shiitake settlement, there were 68 households and 211 people, all serfs. In the tomato settlement, there were 30 households and 152 people. Among them, 10 households and 28 people were freedmen, the rest were serfs. In the barley settlement, there were 48 households and 155 people, all serfs. In the wheat settlement, there were 101 households and 342 people, all serfs. In the flour farm, there were 21 households and 54 people, all serfs. In the dairy farm, there were 18 households and 60 people, all serfs. In the entire flour town, there were a total of 584 households and 1,973 people, only 51 households and 153 people were freedmen, the rest were serfs. In the castle, there were 10 servants, for retainer knight, as well as the 2 followers of Gort and Marcus. Including List, there were a total of 17 people. Among them, Gort and Marcus still had family members. However, they were in the Coral City and did not come. They might not be willing to come, or they might have to wait for some time before coming. Therefore, the total population of the flour town was 1990 people. The vast majority of them were engaged in agriculture, growing barley, wheat, oats, tomatoes, shiitake mushrooms, peanuts, tulip, raising dairy cows, as well as a small number of chickens, ducks, geese, pigs, dogs, and sheep. Only 7% of the population was engaged in handicrafts. There was a tailor shop, a blacksmith shop, a carpenter shop, a bakery, a mill, a grocery store, a leathersmith shop, a barber shop, and a locksmith shop. The census is detailed enough. The mission should be completed by now, thought List as he pushed away the thick bast paper exuding a faint fishy smell. Just then, the old butler Carter came over. "Master, there is a joyous occasion. The flour farm's manager has come to report the joyous occasion to you." Hearing the words flour farm, List's eyes lit up. He understood that this was probably the mission reward. Where is he? Invite him over. For what joyous occasion? Chapter 14. The flour farm had a longer history than the flour town. 18 years ago, Lee William Tulip, who had just been granted the Coral Island, launched his orders of chivalry to explore the island's terrain and found a field of flowers. Among the flowers, there were 2 new varieties of tulip, which were flourishing. For the tulip family, tulip was their lifeblood. Therefore, the Count moved his subjects to grow tulip. However, because of the inconvenient transportation, the Count transplanted the new varieties of tulip to the Coral City within a few years, and the flour farm gradually declined. Today, except for a small number of tulip, the flowers on the flour farm had been eradicated and other crops, such as barley and wheat, were planted. Therefore, when List arrived, he did not see colorful flowers, but only green wheat sprouts. "Sir Lord, there are only 20 mu of tulips left here. The red ones are the Sundance tulips, in memory of Sir Lord's ancestors. The yellow ones are the William I tulips, in memory of Sir Lord's supreme glory." Steward Victor, whose hair was grizzled, sighed endlessly. At its peak, the flour farm had a total of 800 acres. Now, it was only 200 acres, and 180 acres were planted with wheat. Not magic ingredients? Unfortunately, they are indeed not magic ingredients. That is why His Excellency the Count rarely picked the tulips here. But now they are going to be revived. "Sir Lord, look over there, in the tulip field, there is a black tulip with purplish-black flowers, which I have never seen before." List looked over. Indeed, the tulip stood out from the surrounding yellow and red tulip. It was purplish-black. It was like a proud black swan quietly combing its feathers in the arms of a flock of geese. "Is it a magic ingredient?" "I don't know, Sir Lord. I'll go take a look." List pushed aside the ordinary tulip and walked up to the black tulip. He touched the purplish-black petals with his fingers. Suddenly, he perceived a familiar yet strange aura. His eyes lit up. List revealed a satisfied smile. "It's a magic potion. Magic potions, magical ingredients. The mysterious magician's spellcasting was inseparable from the assistance of magic potions. The knight's doqi cultivation was also inseparable from the assistance of magic potions. All kinds of mystical treasures more or less required magic potions as supplementary materials. Even though the prices fluctuated greatly due to the different uses of the potions, the cheapest potion could be sold for at least 1 silver coin. List had never heard of a magic potion that was cheaper than a silver coin. Mastering a magic potion was equivalent to mastering a huge amount of wealth. Now, the black tulip was growing in List's territory. Without a doubt, this wealth belonged to List. According to the aristocratic system and laws, even a count had no right to seize the interests of a lesser lord. Allegiance was one thing, but interests were another. A lord would be in theft to a lesser lord, and the lesser lord would have everything in the territory. It seems that I have not only gained a fortune, but even my tulip sprite worm has found its new home. List took a deep breath. The flower farm should indeed be revived. He signaled Manager Victor and his retainer knight to withdraw from the tulip field. He crouched alone next to the black tulip. He concentrated his mind and calmed his breathing. After a short while, a faint smoke appeared before his eyes, twisting to form words. Mission completed. Reward, a new variety of tulip. Then the smoke twisted and the words changed. Mission, the declining flower farm seems to have ushered in a turnaround in its fate. A new variety of black tulip should shoulder the heavy responsibility of revival together with the tulip sprite worm. Please help the tulip sprite worm settle down its worm stalk. Reward, a World of Warcraft youngling. The mission had been updated. It was not difficult at all, just like a gift. What made List's eyes shine was that the reward was a World of Warcraft youngling. World of Warcraft, the most common low-level World of Warcraft, was more powerful than a trainee knight and could contend against an Earth knight. The Windblade Wolf List encountered a while ago was a low-level World of Warcraft, which was slightly inferior to Earth Knight Marcus. Some low-level World of Warcraft could even contend against a Sky Knight. What World of Warcraft youngling will it be? Can it be raised or slaughtered? List was very much looking forward to it. Master, the tulip sprite worm has been brought. Butler Carter, escorted by his retainer knight, arrived at the flower farm and solemnly handed a jade box to List. After taking the jade box, List could feel that there was a lively little life inside the box, which was connected to him by blood. He opened the box. Immediately, he saw a light yellow baby silkworm, thicker than a thumb and shorter than an index finger, with cyan-colored stripes on its back. Compared to the baby silkworm, the sprite worm had a jade-like luster all over its body. It looked like a long wriggling jade strip, extremely beautiful. At this time, the sprite worm was lazily sleeping on the powder of nephrite powder. During the transplanting period, the sprite worm's worm stalk was in its stomach and could not provide nutrients, so it had to gnaw on the jade powder to maintain its vitality. Jade, also known as magic jade, was a stone with magic power. Although it was much cheaper than the gemstones produced by dragons, it was still a rare treasure-grade mineral. Little guy, have you rested enough? It's time to take a look at your new home. List extended his index finger. Sensing his thoughts, the lazy tulip sprite worm slowly climbed up his finger and rested on his palm. Its sesame-sized bright black eyes looked around, as if sizing up the environment of its new home. What a beautiful life. No matter how many times I see it, I still can't get enough of it. Gort, who had rushed over, looked at the sprite worm and exclaimed in admiration. As a destitute chevalier knight, he did not have a sprite worm. As a chevalier knight, the lowest rank in the aristocratic system, he often had a fief, and the rich could buy a sprite worm. However, Gort's fief had long since declined and was sold off by him, becoming a destitute knight without a fief. Naturally, he could not afford to raise a sprite worm. List walked to the center of the tulip field, pointed at the black tulip, and said softly, little guy, settle down here and plant your worm stalk. Thanks to the contract, the sprite worm understood List's thoughts. It slowly opened its mouth and spat out a green radiance, which fell into the open space next to the black tulip. Immediately afterward, a tulip took root and germinated, growing branches and leaves. At the top of the cyan branches and leaves was a pale yellow tulip. This was its worm stalk, which could affect the growth of the surrounding several tens of mu of tulip. As a sprite worm, it could probably make a tulip grow 2 more seasons. Moreover, the quality of the tulip would be improved. List placed the tulip worm into the worm stalk flower, which was its home. Apparently, spitting out the worm stalk and replanting it had consumed a lot of its physical strength. The tulip worm lay lazily in the flower, motionless. List had no choice but to urge it, little guy, there is a new tulip next door, don't you want to try it? The tempted tulip worm slowly crawled out of the flower and up the leaf along the stem. Then, it continued to crawl up until it reached the tip of the leaf. Just as it was about to fall, it raised its head and crawled into the air. Its body emitted a faint radiance, as if it was crawling on a transparent object. Little by little, it crawled towards the black tulip flower next door. It wriggled its fat body. The tulip worm responded to List with an excited emotion, and then rolled around in the purple-black flower. This was assimilation. It represented that the tulip worm began to collect the pheromones of the black tulip and applied its ability to the black tulip. Of course, List was more willing to believe that the tulip worm was collecting different genes to improve itself. After collecting enough, it would have the opportunity to evolve. In Tulip Castle, there were 2 tulip worms that evolved into tulip lesser sprites by relying on this method. One of them was given to List's sister, Li Weiwei. In List's memory, he was envious and jealous of this. When he was conferred the title of Baron, he became even more jealous. Chapter 15. Once the tulip sprite was assimilated, it could be put back into the jade box and raised in the castle. Moreover, there was no need to feed it jade powder. The worm stalk could absorb nutrients on its own to feed the sprite worm. This process would take about a day. Back in the castle, List started writing. He spread out a thick bast paper, dipped a quill in ink, and began to sketch the serpentines. Without phone calls or faxes, he could only use the most primitive letters to communicate. He intended to write to the Earl of Coral Island and the Baron of Falcon Town, namely his father and sister. The Count had a tulip greater sprite, a tulip lesser sprite, and several tulip sprite worms. The Baron had a tulip lesser sprite. This meant that the black tulip in List's territory was of great importance to the sprites. The Count and the Baron would certainly be willing to pay the price to assimilate this new breed. Here, not to mention blood brothers, even father and son had to settle accounts clearly. By taking advantage of the assimilation, I might be able to exchange for a sprite worm from the Count and a batch of living supplies from the Baron. He had already thought of what he wanted to exchange for. Sprites were the #1 productive force. If he could exchange for an opportunity, he would absolutely not let it go. Secondly, there was a shortage of living supplies. In fact, the castle lacked everything. List was not a hard-working and simple person, he liked to enjoy life. Secondly, I can talk to the Count about the cultivation and sale of the black tulip. As a specialty product, the black tulip can only be grown here. However, the right to sell it can be handed over to the Count. As for the profits, it should not be a problem for me to take 20%. However, it will take a year or 2 for the black tulip to be mass-produced. He stopped writing, pondered for a moment, and then continued writing. Perhaps I can collect the Count's sales agent deposit. I have to get more gold coins. It will be very difficult to develop the flower town without start-up funds. In particular, a safe and wide road must be opened for the Thorns Ridge. If you want to get rich, you must first build a road. Basically, that was the content. When the 2 letters were written, Marcus had already arrived. As an Earth Knight, only Marcus was qualified to deliver the letters. List hadn't practiced the middle-level combat power yet, so his combat power was very weak. "Teacher Marcus, I have 2 letters here that I need you to deliver for me." "At your service." Marcus returned the salute. His tone seemed to have changed. Before List became an Earth Knight, he might have only answered, yes, but now he said, "I am willing to help." List noticed this change, but he didn't say anything. "Also, I need a mid-level combat energy scroll. Tulip Castle's 1,000 waves is not suitable for me. Bring me the Knight Academy's Fire Surge." "Oh, help me ask Steward Lewis if there are any other fire element combat energy scrolls in Tulip Castle." "No problem. Have a good rest tonight and leave tomorrow. Pay attention to safety when crossing the Thorns Ridge." List thought for a moment. "Your yellow-gray horse isn't good enough, ride my fiery dragon." Marcus bowed in thanks. "Thank you for your kindness, but the yellow-gray horse and I have been on the battlefield. It is my old companion, so it is more suitable for me to ride it." "As you wish. If Sir Baron doesn't have anything else, then I will take my leave first." "Go ahead." "Mr. Marcus, good afternoon." Tom Pigsty, who was carrying a bucket, respectfully greeted Marcus, who was leaving the castle. Marcus faintly nodded. "Hello to you too." Tom was immediately overwhelmed by the favor. Usually, Marcus and Gort wouldn't say hello to him. He was just a male servant in the castle who did the heavy work. His position was probably lower than the assistant male servant, Jesse Ricewater, who was in charge of feeding the horses, chopping firewood and sweeping manure, and the kitchen maid, Irene Fourfingers. He wanted to bow to Marcus, but he forgot that he was carrying a bucket on his shoulder. When he bent down, the pole slipped and the bucket spilled half of the water. "Be careful." "Oh, okay, Mr. Marcus." After Marcus rode away, Thomas appeared out of nowhere. "You are really clumsy, spilling half of 2 buckets of water." "Mr. Tom Pigsty, perhaps Master should let you feed the pigs, that would be more suitable for you." Tom picked up the bucket without looking at Thomas. "I will go get 2 more buckets of water." He was a head taller than Thomas, but he habitually lowered his head. Thomas sneered, "Other than fetching water, what else can you do?" "No, you can't even fetch water well. You will be a serving man for the rest of your life. I am Master's valet, and sooner or later, I will replace old Carter and become the castle's butler. At that time, the first thing I will do is to drive you to feed the pigs." "You won't, Mr. Carter is Master's confidant." Tom argued in a low voice. "Humph, Master has already let me follow him out and trusts me. I am still young, and sooner or later, I will replace old Carter." "You won't." Tom didn't want to say any more and turned to leave. After pouring the water from the bucket into the large water tank, the maid Debbie Window came over to fetch the water. She glanced at Thomas, who was strolling outside the castle. "Tom, did Thomas give you trouble again?" "Nothing. You shouldn't be afraid of him. He is nothing special. Master will see your hard work." "I know, I am not afraid of him. Master is a very good person. I work hard, Master can see it, and Mr. Carter can also see it." Tom wiped the sweat from his forehead. "But, thank you, Debbie. Do you need me to help you carry water upstairs? Will it be troublesome?" "It's okay, the work Mr. Carter arranged for me is very easy." "Tom, you are really a good person." Early in the morning, Thomas ate breakfast and fed his yellow-gray horse enough beans and hay. He carefully examined the 2 letters from List and the 5 letters from Gort, and then looked at the few words he wrote on the thick bast paper. The few words were used to remind him not to forget. List needed the fire-attributed cheese secret manual, old Carter asked him to buy the thick bast paper, Gort wanted a box of cigars, and the retainer knight Odin Insole asked him to buy scabies ointment as well as the bowstring he needed. When he encountered the Windblade wolves, he had pulled the bowstring too hard, causing it to break. He needed to replace it with a new bowstring. Then he wiped his knight lance and the one-handed sword, counted the feathered arrows in his quiver, and got everything ready. He mounted his horse, left the small town, and galloped towards the Thorns Ridge. The Thorns Ridge was an undulating hill. In fact, it should be two hills joined together. One was a north-south hill, while the other was an east-west hill. There was a small path in the middle, which was the only way to enter and exit the flower town. World of Warcraft appeared in the mountain forest. However, there were not many of them, especially in this season, when food was plentiful and World of Warcraft rarely went out. Therefore, the small path between the hills was relatively safe. As an Earth Knight, he was not afraid of ordinary wild beasts. After traveling for less than a kilometer, suddenly, he sensed World of Warcraft's aura. Why did I encounter World of Warcraft again? I was really unlucky when I encountered the Windblade Wolves previously. Marcus grasped his knight lance and nervously watched the direction from which World of Warcraft's aura was spreading. After waiting for a moment, World of Warcraft did not show up. Marcus narrowed his eyes. World of Warcraft, which was hidden, was more dangerous than World of Warcraft. He patted the yellow-gray horse beneath him and pretended to leave, trying to lure World of Warcraft out. After traveling for another half a kilometer, World of Warcraft, which had been following him, finally became impatient and took the initiative to attack him. A tall figure sprang out from the woods beside the small path and fiercely pounced. Marcus had been on guard along the way, so it was naturally impossible for him to be ambushed. Practically at the same time, he turned his horse around and thrust his knight lance to meet the attack. Chapter 16. Flying Dust Dog. Marcus was greatly shocked. The knight's spear was trembling. But the next moment, he suddenly discovered that his knight's spear had accurately pierced a small bloody hole in the Flying Dust Dog's body. The Flying Dust Dog's ferocious momentum was also blocked by his spear and it fell heavily to the ground. The Flying Dust Dog was about to turn around and attack again. But Marcus didn't give it the chance. He threw away the knight's spear, which wasn't suitable for close combat, and pulled out the one-handed sword hanging on the back of his horse, slashing at the Flying Dust Dog. The Earth Knight's strength was astonishing, and he had also systematically trained with the one-handed sword. For a moment, the Flying Dust Dog, which was even larger than the Windblade Wolf, howled as it slashed at it. Its sporadic counterattacks were simply out of order. Moreover, from start to finish, the Flying Dust Dog didn't release any magic. It was just playing hand-to-hand combat with Marcus. Why is the World of Warcraft Flying Dust Dog, the most powerful of the Thorns Ridge, no different from an ordinary beast? Why is it so weak? There were 10,000 doubts in his mind. But the sword in his hand didn't stop in the slightest. A moment later, the Flying Dust Dog was seriously injured and fell to the ground, blood flowing everywhere. Only its last breath was left. Marcus didn't dare to relax. He picked up the knight's spear from the ground and aimed at the Flying Dust Dog's throat. Poochie! Woo-woo! The Flying Dust Dog's eyes became slack as it breathed its last. Taking out the rope he carried, Marcus skillfully tied the rope to the Flying Dust Dog's tail. Then, he mounted the yellow-gray horse and galloped back the way he came from. He didn't dare to stay in the Thorns Ridge for too long, especially since the smell of the Flying Dust Dog's blood would attract wild beasts and even World of Warcraft attacks. According to the laws of the aristocracy, all the output of a territory belonged to the lord. Therefore, even if this Flying Dust Dog was killed by Marcus, it still belonged to List. He galloped all the way and quickly returned to the two-storied castle. Teacher Marcus. Karl Hammerstein was on duty. Their retainer knight needed to protect the castle. Quick, inform Sir Baron that I hunted a World of Warcraft. What? World of Warcraft? Soon, the entire castle was alarmed. Whether it was the squire knight, servitors, maids, stewards, or kitchen maids, they all followed behind List to watch World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft wasn't rare. Tulip Castle had World of Warcraft, but in this small place, World of Warcraft was still a rarity. Moreover, World of Warcraft was valuable, and every part of it was a treasure. Teacher Marcus, is this the King of Thorns Ridge, the very powerful violent dog in low-level World of Warcraft? List's eyes flickered as he pondered. It really is a flying dust dog. Normally, even two of me wouldn't necessarily be able to defeat a flying dust dog. It can release earth element magic, rock thorns, making it impossible to defend against. But the one I killed only knew how to pounce. It didn't release any magic at all. It didn't release magic. What do you think is the reason? Marcus had obviously observed and pondered while waiting. I think I might have encountered a female flying dust dog that had just given birth. Look at its abdomen, it's shriveled and flabby. This is a characteristic after giving birth. It's still breastfeeding. Also, I noticed that there are a lot of bite marks on its body. Breastfeeding? Bite marks? Here, and here, they are all bite marks. Sir Baron, do you remember the Windblade wolf we encountered before? These bite marks have started to heal. I can't see them clearly, but I think they're from a Windblade wolf. In that case. List felt reassured. This flying dust dog suffered an attack from a Windblade wolf during its pregnancy. It might have won and given birth to its offspring, but the battle exhausted its physical strength and mana. As a result, it had no choice but to use its beastly instincts to hunt, and then encountered Teacher Marcus? Very likely. List suppressed the excitement in his heart and calmly said, since that's the case, Teacher Marcus, compared to the valuable corpse of the flying dust dog, I think its pup is the real treasure. Can you still fight? Will you search the Thorns Ridge with me and find the flying dust dog's pup? I'm ready to fight at any time. Marcus stuck out his chest, and then said, but the Thorns Ridge is very dangerous, I can search by myself. Together, I'm also an Earth Knight. Sir Baron, don't forget, nobles also need to fight. Just treat this as my combat knight class. List said righteously. In fact, what he was thinking was that the mission reward was right there, how could he not take it? Moreover, the fact that the weakened flying dust dog could survive and attack Marcus showed that there was no threat to its World of Warcraft. Otherwise, it would have already turned into a pile of feces. No one could stop List's decision. Marcus put one hand on his chest and respectfully displayed the knight etiquette, expressing his respect for List's courage. The butler, old Carter, bowed and said, Master, you are courageous and strong. Glory will be with you. Of course. List put on the World of Warcraft leather armor, mounted his horse, and said in a heroic and extraordinary manner, let's go. 2 Earth Knights, followed by 4 Retainer Knights, galloped all the way and soon entered the boundary of the Thorns Ridge. Under Marcus's lead, they arrived at the place where he first sensed the aura of the flying dust dog. Sir Baron, this is the place. I sensed the aura here, then the flying dust dog followed me for a kilometer before launching a sneak attack on me. Then, its nest should be nearby. Let's start looking. The mound was undulating, the forest was disorderly. The group of 6 searched for half an hour, but still couldn't find the flying dust dog's nest. They couldn't help but feel a little anxious and disappointed. Sir, perhaps the flying dust dog just wandered here, its nest might not be here, or it might not even have a nest. Carl said. List firmly said, I believe its nest is here. It was impossible to not have the reward from the smoke mission, this was his source of confidence. After thinking for a moment, he asked, do any of you know how the flying dust dog barks? The flying dust dog is also a dog, its barking is no different from an ordinary dog. Marcus answered. Then, Carl, Rome, Gray, Odin, the 4 of you keep imitating dog barks. If there are flying dust dog pups here, they will definitely respond. They shouldn't understand the meaning of your dog barks, they will think that it is their mother calling them. Good idea. Marcus agreed. Immediately, he and the 4 retainer knights imitated various dog barks and continued to search the nearby area. A quarter of an hour later, Marcus suddenly raised his hand. Silence. When everyone stopped talking, he made a sound of listening and softly said, "Sir Baron, listen." Liszt listened attentively, and after a few seconds, he heard a very weak, woo sound behind the unknown bird calls. It was the barking of a dog. "It's over there." "Yes, it's over there." Marcus indicated to Karl, "Your dog's barking is the most similar, now continue to imitate it." Karl did as he was told. Every time he barked, there would be an woo sound from not far away. Following this unclear conversation, Liszt and the others finally found the flying dust dog's nest, which was inside a bush. Pushing aside the straw at the entrance of the cave, Liszt reached out and picked up a very, very small puppy that had not yet opened its eyes. He carefully handed the puppy to Liszt. "Sir Baron, this is the puppy of the flying dust dog, a priceless treasure. It hasn't opened its eyes yet, but when it does, it will recognize its master." Not all World of Warcraft would recognize a master, but World of Warcraft dogs had this habit. The first thing they saw was the one they recognized. Most of the time, the one they saw was their mother. Perhaps recognizing a master was actually recognizing a mother. The puppy shivered in Liszt's arms, and from time to time let out an woo sound, seeming very afraid. It probably smelled the unfamiliar scent on Liszt's body, which was not the scent it had when it was drinking milk. Chapter 17. Because of the flying dust dog, Marcus decided to postpone his departure for a day. While resting, he told Liszt some things to pay attention to when raising World of Warcraft. Even if World of Warcraft can recognize a master, they are still full of danger. They have no concept of good and evil, and their temperament is also temperamental. Once they become proficient in using magic power, they are likely to inadvertently hurt people. Therefore, Sir Baron needs to actively guide and train the flying dust dog pup when raising it. Like the pack of hounds raised in Tulip Castle? Yes, you have to train it to be obedient from a young age so that it listens to your commands. You also have to constantly consume its magic power and let it vent its magic power in training, so that it won't use magic to hurt people during normal times. The flying dust dog's rock thorns are very deadly spells. How long will it take for it to release magic? I'm not very clear. However, in World of Warcraft, before it reaches adulthood, its magic is very weak. Flying dust dogs can reach adulthood in about a year and a half, in other words, there is a year and a half to tame it. Very well, I will treat this as a cultivation lesson and persevere in training it. Marcus was clearly in a good mood. After explaining the things to pay attention to, he said some rare compliments: peanut worm, potions, World of Warcraft, Sir Baron will surprise everyone on Coral Island. Liszt smiled. The surprise was yet to come. He asked, "What should I do with the flying dust dog's corpse?" "Perhaps you should ask Lord Gort. He used to manage the trading market for Sir Count, so he is the clearest about the value of World of Warcraft. Mr. Carter, help me invite Teacher Gort." "As you wish, Master." Gort hurried over. When he saw the flying dust dog's corpse, he exclaimed, "Wow, what am I seeing? Is this the King of Thorns Ridge, flying dust dog?" Heavens, it is a low-level World of Warcraft, but I feel that it exudes the terrifying aura of an intermediate-level World of Warcraft. Marcus, I must admit that you are one of the top knight of Coral Island. The most powerful knight of Coral Island was undoubtedly Liszt's father, the Sky Knight, Earl of Coral Island Lee William Tulip. He was also the only powerful knight with a high-grade chi. The rest were all Earth Knights. As for World of Warcraft on Coral Island, it seemed that there was only one intermediate World of Warcraft in the southern shallow waters, the Purple Sand Crocodile. The other World of Warcraft in the mountains were all low-level World of Warcraft. Thorns Ridge only had low-level World of Warcraft. The Violent Dog was the most powerful low-level World of Warcraft in Thorns Ridge. Teacher Gort, what should we do with this World of Warcraft? List asked. Gort poked the body of the Flying Dust Dog with his walking stick. The Flying Dust Dog was the size of a calf, and the blood all over its body had congealed. It looked terrible. Its fur is already damaged. Otherwise, the fur of a Flying Dust Dog is the most precious, worth at least 100 Neldas. Nelda was the name of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire's gold coin. It was the name of the Sapphire Grand Duke. It should still be worth some gold coins, right? It can only be sold as scraps of skin. I guess there might be profiteers willing to pay 5 Neldas, or conscientious merchants willing to pay 10 Neldas. Gort continued his analysis. I think its meat should be around 600 caddies. World of Warcraft meat is generally sold for 1 silver coin per caddy on the market. The Violent Dog meat should be sold for 2 silver coins per caddy, which is 12 Neldas. However, List, you should keep it for yourself to eat. You need to stabilize your chi. Mr. Gort is right, selling its meat is not cost-effective. The castle needs to buy meat from outside. Carter interjected. As a trusted butler, he could participate in this discussion. In addition to the fur and meat, the rest are bones and internal organs. World of Warcraft's internal organs can be sold to those mages who hide their heads but show their tails. I know where mages are. They always like to buy World of Warcraft's internal organs and all kinds of mysterious flowers and plants. It is hard to say how much Neldas. As for the bones, they are good for making soup. Speaking until here, Gort smiled mischievously. Unfortunately, it is a female dog. If it was a male dog, wow, it would be a great tonic. The difference between a male dog and a female dog was the presence or absence of a whip. List said, then peel off the Violent Dog's skin and sell it after tanning it. Clean up the internal organs and marinate them. Teacher Gort, are there any mages on Coral Island? There doesn't seem to be any. Then keep the internal organs in the castle for yourself to eat. In this way, we are all in luck. Praise the generous Baron List. At night, a small barbecue party was held in the castle. The servants, retainer knight, as well as the host, List and the 2 teachers, ate delicious barbecue and chatted about wonderful things. List actually didn't like this kind of lively scene. He was a quiet person deep down. However, life in the castle was like this. The majority of castles were dark, and living here for a long time would be very depressing. Therefore, one needed to find an opportunity to vent, and a party was the best opportunity. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, the servants tidied up the messy cutlery and wine glasses. List went upstairs and went straight to the originally unused recreation room. The recreation room had been converted into a den for the Violent Dog pup. The puppy was kept here until it opened its eyes. This was to ensure that the first person it saw was List. Therefore, feeding and bathing the puppy had to be done by List himself. The puppy was shivering, so List gave it the name Dosen. Hello, Dosen, drink some milk. List handed a leather bag filled with milk to Dosen's mouth. The mouth of the bag was specially tailored to make it more presentable. Smelling the milk, the desire to drink milk overcame the fear of the unfamiliar smell. Dosen quickly crawled over, fumbled with the mouth of the bag, and then gulped down big mouthfuls. Although it was only the size of a toy poodle, the way it ate was very similar to World of Warcraft, wolfing down the food. In the blink of an eye, the bag of milk was eaten clean by Dosen. Also with this bag of milk, Dosen was familiar with List's smell. Now that List could stroke its fur, not only did Dosen not hide, it even rubbed against his palm, showing intimacy. Those who didn't know would really think that List was just raising a dog, and not the king of the Thorns Ridge, the Violent Dog of World of Warcraft. When are you going to open your eyes? As if it heard List's words, Dosun's mouth issued a soft whine. List was slightly lost in thought. Smoke once again appeared in front of his eyes. The smoke quickly changed into a paragraph of text: mission completed. Reward, violent dog pup. Sure enough, Dosun is the reward. I have already figured out the mechanism of the smoke mission. As he pondered, the smoke serpentines in front of him changed. Mission: as an Earth Knight, you need to shoulder the heavy responsibility of charging on horseback. Please practice an intermediate Chi secret manual and become a true knight capable of fighting. Reward: a dragon horse with a meager bloodline. Chapter 18. Dragon Stallion. List was no stranger to it. Because his biological father, Earl of Coral Island Lee William Tulip, currently held the position of a court groom, feeding Sapphire Grand Duke's beloved horse, a divine steed mixed with dragon bloodline. There were dragons in this world. They were not Eastern dragons, nor were they Western dragons. Rather, they were the incomparably magnificent essence of heaven and earth. This type of dragon was essentially genderless, and it would not mate or leave offspring. But just like how they could produce gems and metals, they could also infect other species and possess dragon bloodline. Some busybodies classified dragons, sprites, World of Warcraft, and so on according to their preciousness. The most precious was, of course, the dragon, the symbol of a country. The second most precious was the dragon sprite, the authority of a greater aristocrat. The third most precious was the greater sprite, the authority of an intermediate aristocrat. The third most precious was the dragon species World of Warcraft, the World of Warcraft mixed with dragon bloodline. The third most precious was the lesser sprite, the authority of a lesser aristocrat. The third most precious was the dragon species Wild Beasts, the common animals mixed with dragon bloodline. The last most precious was the sprite worm, the basic representation of productivity. In fact, there was another kind of sprite, the same as the dragon, the Elf King. According to legend, the dragon sprite was the evolution endpoint. Its main body was infinitely large, a tree could breed a forest. Countless World of Warcraft, sprites, and even dragons lived on its main body. Only, most people regarded the Elf King as a legend. When sprite worms evolved into lesser sprites, 1 out of dozens might succeed. When sprites evolved into greater sprites, 1 out of hundreds might succeed. When great sprites evolved into dragon sprites, 1 out of hundreds might succeed. When a dragon sprite evolved into an elf king, it had never been heard of. When List was bored, he did a probability conversion. He assumed that the probability of sprite worms evolving was 1/50th, the probability of sprites evolving was 1/100, the probability of great sprites evolving was 1/500, and the probability of dragon sprites evolving was 1/1000. Then, the probability of a sprite worm evolving into an elf king was 1/2, 500,000,000, or 1 in 2. 5 billion. The probability of 1 in 2. 5 billion was close to 0. It was no wonder that no one had seen an elf king. He looked at the smoke serpentines in front of him. List's heart burned with passion. Theoretically speaking, dragon horses were more precious than sprite worms. In terms of ability, the dragon stallion might not be able to defeat any World of Warcraft because it didn't know magic. However, as a rare dragon bloodline, its price would not be low. In this world, anything that had anything to do with dragons would be popular. Furthermore, the dragon bloodline itself would improve the aptitude of the species. If a horse was mixed with the dragon bloodline, it would immediately become a fine steed. The dragon stallion was definitely an excellent warhorse breed. Why did the Sapphire Grand Duke cherish his dragon stallion so much that even the Earl of Coral Island would fight over it? This was because the dragon stallion was the standard blue blood horse of the Grand Duchy of Sapphire's most elite orders of chivalry. It had 240 years of history, the Blue Blood Orders of Chivalry. The Blue Blood Orders of Chivalry fought in all directions for the Sapphire family and had outstanding military service. The Blue Blood horses under them had contributed a lot. Of course, the Sapphire Grand Duke would ride a Blue Blood horse in order to win over the Orders of Chivalry and show that he was with the knight. A dragon stallion. If I have a dragon stallion and it continues to breed, can I also form an elite Blue Blood Orders of Chivalry? Just thinking about it made him very excited. However, at present, only 3 people in the Flower Town had Chi, Liszt, Marcus, and Gort. Even if he was given a large number of dragon stallions, the Orders of Chivalry were still nowhere to be seen. There was still a long way to go. After a while, he came back to his senses, and the smoke serpentines disappeared before his eyes. Looking at Dosen, who had returned to his den and started sleeping, Liszt suddenly felt that the Orders of Chivalry were too far away. However, riding a dragon stallion, leading a World of Warcraft dog, and strolling around to go hunting, such a life was still very easy to achieve. Tomorrow, Marcus will return to the Coral City and then go to the Falcon Town. He will be back in about 3 days. By then, I will be able to cultivate the Chi secret manual and complete the mission. Liszt got up and left the recreation room. Marcus once again left the Flower Town. Liszt would not just wait in the castle. After recuperating, he could no longer stay idle. Early in the morning, he arrived at the flower farm. The black tulip worm on the tulip flower was about to complete its assimilation. It will take about 2 hours. After looking at the tulip worm, Liszt mounted his horse and went straight to the peanut settlement. His peanut sprite worm was still in gestation. Karl Hammerstein was standing guard here. Sir. How is my peanut sprite worm? It is still sleeping. Elder George has people watering it with a lot of feces every day. The peanut sprite worm stalk is growing very vigorously. Strictly protect the peanut sprite worm, I don't want any accidents to happen to it. Sir, please rest assured. After leaving the peanut settlement, Liszt returned to the flower farm. After waiting for half an hour, the tulip worm successfully completed its assimilation. After retrieving the tulip worm, Liszt could feel its cheerfulness as well as a trace of aura coming from its body. This trace of aura was the black tulip's aura, indicating that the tulip worm could already influence the black tulip. Since its birth, Tulip Castle had arranged for all sprite worms to assimilate as many varieties as possible to increase their strength. Liszt's tulip worm had already assimilated all the varieties of tulip cultivated by the tulip family. After assimilating the black tulip, why do I feel that the tulip worm is somewhat excited? It can't be that it wants to evolve, right? A bold thought floated in his mind. But he quickly denied it. The tulip worm he had obtained was the weakest among the tulip family's several tulip worms, and the possibility of it evolving was very low. A new variety of magic ingredients was not enough to make it evolve. After retrieving the tulip worm, Liszt handed it over to the butler Carter to feed. With the worm stalk already planted, even if the sprite worm did not eat or drink, it would not die. It was very easy to feed. Liszt quickly met up with Gort and arrived at the dairy farm. There are a lot of alfalfa seeds. Starting from here, I plan to gradually uproot the two-leaf grass. Planting alfalfa. When the scale increases, the alfalfa worm will be able to plant the worm stalk, the cows will be able to adapt to the new pasture, and the horses can also be brought here to be fed. The worm stalk must be surrounded by plants of the same variety. Otherwise, the worm stalk would not be able to absorb nutrients and would wither. The planting of the alfalfa worm stalk was very easy to solve. Liszt had nothing to add, let's follow Teacher Gort's plan. However, how did you decide on the corn sprite worm and thorn sprite worm? Corn sprite worm, my idea is to cultivate a piece of wasteland and plant corn to see if it can survive. As for thorn sprite worm, we can only think of a solution in the Thorns Ridges Thorns forest. Liszt, I don't think thorn sprite worm will be of much use. Thorns were small thorny shrubs. They were usually used as fences. Many aristocratic manors liked to plant a ring of thorns to serve as a green hedge. List also felt that thorn sprite worm was of little use. At most, it could cultivate a batch of thorny fences for the castle to protect the manor from the invasion of small animals. As for World of Warcraft, a Windblade wolf's windblade could cut down a large area of thorns. Fire Dragon leisurely ate the two-leaf grass. Chapter 19. The milk produced by the dairy farm was a rare luxury in the flower town. Originally, the milk from the dairy farm was used to produce milk powder, which was given to the Earl of Coral Island as a tax every 3 months. After List arrived, milk was sent to the castle every day. There were 10 cows in total. Among them, there were 3 young cows that were less than 2 years old and had not yet started to produce milk. 2 old cows could no longer produce milk. 1 male cow could not produce milk. Only 4 mature female cows could produce milk every day. He didn't know if it was because the breed of the cows was not good enough, or if they didn't eat well enough, so the milk production was very low. Dehua is in the peak period of milk production. She can squeeze out 20 kilograms of fresh milk 3 times a day. Xiaohua is in the low milk period and can only squeeze out 4 kilograms a day. Dahe is also in the low milk period and can only squeeze out 5 kilograms a day. Dehuang is currently in the low milk period and can only squeeze out 5 kilograms a day. The old steward was not very old, but he was already hunched and looked very old. List approached a cow. The cow was very docile and was slowly eating the grass. Do you still want to raise cows that can't produce milk? Zhuangzhuang needs to ensure that all the female cows are impregnated. Milk Flower, Milk Black, and Milk Yellow were still small, and they would only be able to conceive and produce milk next year. Old Hua and Old Black are already old. We've already reported this to the Lord. They can come and slaughter the cow for meat at any time, the old steward said respectfully. Milk Flower, Milk Black, and Milk Yellow were the names of underage cows. Xiao Hua and Xiao He were the names of cows that had just reached adulthood. Dahua, Dahe, and Dahuang were the names of cows in their prime. Old Hua and Old Black were the names of old cows. Zhuangzhuang was the name of a male cow. List recalled that a while ago, Butler Carter had mentioned to him that the dairy farm had 2 old cows that could be killed and eaten at any time. Raising cows that could not produce milk for another day was equivalent to wasting a day's worth of food. Generally speaking, they would be slaughtered immediately. It sounded ruthless, but cows could only produce milk for their entire lives, and when they were old, they still had to contribute their own meat. For the time being, the castle did not hold any large-scale banquets, and the meat they brought was still enough, so the 2 old cows continued to be raised on the dairy farm. Is the pasture on the farm enough to feed the cows? It's enough, my lord. We only have 10 cows, but we have 150 acres of grassland. Old steward, how many acres of grassland do you think is enough to feed 10 cows? Sir Overlord, 1 cow needs 10 acres of grassland to feed. However, we often take our cows to the wild to graze, so 8 acres of grassland is enough to feed them. 8 mu for 1 cow. 10 cows will require 80 mu. Then, Teacher Gort, let's get rid of 70 mu of 2-leaf grass and change to alfalfa. No problem, leave it to me. Gort patted his chest and promised. On the census project, List's swift and decisive attitude made Gort feel a sense of crisis, and his work attitude became much more proper. He could already tell that List was not a pompous and indulgent aristocrat, but a down-to-earth aristocrat. If he wanted to obtain power, he had to change his style. Hey, Dosen. Inspecting the peanut worm. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. The 3rd day was a rainy day. Spring was deep in the air and summer had yet to arrive. The rain was as precious as oil, and the agricultural production of each village was busy advancing. The alfalfa seeds had already been sown, and the corn fields had also been carved out from the wild, ready to be cultivated and planted. The Thorns forest still had no clue, so he had to wait for Marcus to return and then go to the Thorns Ridge to look for it. The fourth day. After eating lunch in the castle, the butler Carter hurriedly walked into the study. "Master, Mr. Marcus has returned and is waiting for your summons outside the castle. Quickly invite him in." "Sir Baron, Marcus greets you." The travel-worn Marcus brought 2 mid-level cheese secret manuals that Liszt was looking forward to. One was the fire surge fluctuations that Liszt was familiar with, and the other was the fire dragon drill that he obtained from Tulip Castle. After receiving the 2 secret manuals, Liszt turned to ask, "Teacher Marcus, I gave my letter to the Baron and the Count, how did they reply?" "This is the reply from Sir Count and Sir Baron, as well as the 10 naldas for the sale of the fur of the flying dust dog." "Teacher Marcus, please sit down, I will read the letter first." The first to be opened was the reply from the Earl of Coral Island. Because there were not many words written on the thick bast paper, the content of the letter was very little. Lee William Tulip replied to Liszt that he was preparing to send someone to complete the assimilation of the black tulip in the near future, and at the same time to discuss how to sell the black tulip. He also promised to buy a batch of urgently needed supplies for Liszt as a down payment for the transaction. The other was the reply from the Baron of Falcon Town. Li Weiwei replied to Liszt, congratulating him on discovering a new breed of tulip. She would come with the Count and use supplies to exchange for the right to assimilate them. They were all official and polite replies. There was not much familial affection. After the death of Liszt's mother, the Count's first wife, the relationship between the 3 siblings gradually faded due to the lack of maternal love. The Count, on the other hand, turned from hope to disappointment because of Liszt's appearance, and the relationship became even thinner. But that's fine. I can accept this kind of thin affection. I can't stand it. After reading the letter, Liszt felt a little emotional. He put down the letter. Liszt said gently, "Teacher Marcus, what new things have you seen on this trip? Coral Island is calm as usual, and there is no war in the Grand Duchy. However, there is one thing, I don't know if it is new or not. It is about Sir Baron's mother's family." "My mother's family?" Liszt had almost forgotten that his mother was also of noble birth. He asked, "What happened in Longtaro Castle?" "The owner of Longtaro Castle, the Marquis of Red Crab Island, has resigned from his post as the captain of the court fleet and returned to Red Crab Island because of an illness. Sir Count is preparing to send someone to visit. When the envoy comes to assimilate the black tulip, he will probably discuss the matter with Sir Baron. Maybe." Liszt searched the memory of his predecessor and recalled the Longtaro Castle in his memory. The Grand Duchy of Sapphire was an archipelago, with many large and small islands and theft with many aristocrats. One of the large islands, Red Crab Island, was owned by the Taro family. The lord was the Grand Duchy's hereditary Marquis of Red Crab Island, Merlin Longtaro, Liszt's grandfather. The surname of the Taro family originated from the Longtaro Great Sprite they owned. The castle they lived in was Longtaro Castle, which was far larger and more luxurious than Tulip Castle. It was magnificent and located high in the mountains. Marquis Merlin had 1 son and 2 daughters, the eldest son, Masiro, the second daughter, Melinda, and the third daughter, Melissa. Melissa Longtaro was Liszt's mother. When Lee William Tulip was still a viscount, Marquis Merlin saw that he was extraordinary. He married his third daughter, Melissa, to the Tulip family and gave birth to 3 children, Levis, Li Weiwei, and Liszt. So far, Liszt would go to Longtaro Castle every year to celebrate his grandfather's birthday. However, since Lee William remarried the new countess, the relationship between the Taro family and the Tulip family gradually became estranged. But in any case, Marquis Merlin was Liszt's grandfather. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.